Hey, we're on.
It's a ward.
Hello. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting. We are convening a special meeting regarding power shutoffs in Calaveras County. This is a special meeting, and when it's done, we will close it and resume our other meeting, our regular meeting. So I will pass it over to the CAO.
Actually, I'll primarily be providing color commentary to support John and his presentation of where we stand in the PSPS event.
Thank you, Al. Good afternoon, board members. Just a quick update on where we are and where we've been in the last 36 hours or so. The background of this, we were notified Sunday afternoon about 6 p.m. that Calaveras County would likely experience some effects from a power safety shutoff. Sunday afternoon, I was on a conference call. During that conference call, we were listed as one of 21 counties in a high probability category to experience effects from a power safety shutdown. High probability was defined as being greater than a 75% chance of being affected. Yesterday, we took part in multiple briefing calls with PG&E and other counties and partners. Yesterday, about this time, the original event was scheduled to start approximately 4 a.m. on the 9th. It was rolled back to midnight tonight. So tonight, we anticipate going to bed with power and waking up without. The weather event itself was expected to last through the 10th at about noon for us. To give you kind of an idea about the scope of this, there's 30 some odd counties involved at this point. There are actually 3 contemporaneous weather events taking place across the state from north, as far north of about Tehama down into the southern counties that are not covered by PG&E, that are covered by Southern Edison. PG&E forecasts that once the weather clears up and they're able to re-energize, that process will take approximately 5 days. What that means is that even though the weather event is forecasted to end on Thursday at about noon, we may not have power for 5 days. The way that will work is over the 5-day period, as PG&E physically inspects all of the lines, they will begin to re-energize circuits, so it'll be a slow recovery over that 5-day period. By the end of that 5-day period, we should be completely restored. That is the red flag warning that was posted this morning for the valley. We are right about there. That would be the one little spot that is not in the red flag warning, and I believe that is actually at this time covered by a separate red flag warning. Red flag warning, extreme fire weather, rapid spread rates, timings from 5 a.m. Tomorrow morning to 5 p.m. Thursday. Winds expected to reach 20 to 30 miles an hour north and northeast with gusts to 40 and 50. Locally higher generally across the ridge tops. Very low daytime humidity. They've been talking about humidity down into the single digits. And poor humidity recovery overnight of 20 to 35%, which is low. What that means is usually during a fire at nighttime, the humidity comes in and helps us and helps the fire to lay down. But with those kinds of percentages at night, we don't really expect that to happen if we were to have a fire. This is the latest Calaveras County outage map. I apologize for its poor quality. There roughly is San Andreas, City of Angels, Copper, and the 4 corridor all the way up to Alpine and into Alpine County. As you can see, roughly in this area would be Valley Springs, which we do not expect to de-energize at this time. Okay, where we are. We initiated our PSPS plan yesterday. We held an initial planning meeting with department heads yesterday afternoon. We are in the throes of finalizing county resiliency centers. 5 at this time. One of them was, fortunately, PG&E came in and is setting up a community resource center at the Claremont Shopping Center on Highway 4 in Arnold. The hours of operation for that center will begin tomorrow from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. I believe it's going to be in the parking lot, but I'm not 100% sure. That actually came sometime after noon this afternoon, so between then and now. We've been participating in 3 conference calls a day with PG&E and the other counties and stakeholders. We've been supporting our local stakeholders, the City of Angels, the fire departments, and our other partners. We sent an alert Calaveras out at 10:35 this morning. This just in from our fabulous folks at IT. We sent 14,672 messages out. Of that, 2,792 confirmed that they had received messages, which actually takes them some extra steps by them. 11,832 were not confirmed but landed somewhere via email or a voicemail box or a text, and 48 were unreachable. To give you the idea of accuracy, so we missed about 0.3% of our phone calls, which is simply outstanding. Kudos to our IT team. They have been working tirelessly to help us and support us, and they've done a great job.
John, excuse
Yes,
me,
ma'am.
are they doing this through Calaveras Alert?
Yes, ma'am.
So if people had texts or emails, they were done the whole,
Yes, if
All
they
the
did
way-
not confirm, they kept moving down the list to the alternate contacts. What we experienced once we dumped the notification, a lot of people were calling us back without listening to their voicemail or looking at their text messages. And so what we did as a backstop to that, we actually changed our business line to OES to reflect the message, and that seemed to help backstop those people that hadn't listened or hadn't received. Sometime contemporaneous to that alert, the decision by PG&E to de-energize the footprint that we saw in that earlier map was made. So let me be clear, this isn't an if situation. We will de-energize sometime around midnight tonight. What's ahead for us? Again, we will de-energize tonight about midnight. The weather event is scheduled to begin about 4 a.m., and that's with the high winds. Obviously, it's Mother Nature, and she will come and go as she pleases. So that's why they are shutting off at midnight. They actually need some time to run power through the switches in order to properly de-energize, and that's going to take about 4 hours. Here locally, we will be holding morning and afternoon briefings with our staff each day. We'll be maintaining the resource centers until re-energization of that particular area. We don't know quite yet where we stand in the priority to be re-energized. And over the course of that 5-day period, we will see incremental power return. And once we do that near or in the community that the centers are placed, we will close down and fold up that center. We're going to be opening our EOC sometime this afternoon or evening. Later today, I intend to declare a county emergency. And then we should see the weather event subside tomorrow about noon. There is a third wave, if you will, of weather, and I'm not sure if that's going to affect that end time or not. It's Thursday, yes, I'm sorry. Days are beginning to run together. County services, we will have a list this afternoon of what we're going to be able to continue to do as a county. There are certain county operations that we are required to have open, and we have made accommodations to keep those functions open that we're required by law to have. We have our PSPS center that is nearby, and we'll be populating that this afternoon. That's me. Where'd it go? That is our ESC Chad, our contact information, and how to follow us on the web and keep up to date. To give you an idea, we have been trying to maintain a high presence on social media. The initial post where we announced that this may happen reached over 2,200 people and was shared, last time I checked, about 19 times. So the word is getting out. Again, super proud of the efforts of our IT guys to hit that accuracy level. It's simply amazing to be able to have that many phone calls and messages go out and them actually landing somewhere, whether it be a voicemail box, an email, or a text message. Does anybody have any questions?
So if I can add a few things that you might have questions on real quickly. So our goals when we started this, really 3 key goals. We wanted to keep the community informed. You've heard about social media. You've heard about Calaveras Alert. You've seen John's press releases. So we've got a pretty wide net on how we've been communicating that this event is going to happen. The second has been, and this really comes from a discussion that we've had in previous meetings. In fact, it was the last PSPS update, or the first one that John provided not long after he first got here, was to make sure that we have some services for our residents. We frankly have been planning all along. PG&E is committed to all of the counties when there was a PSPS that they would provide resiliency centers. To overlap a little bit with what the calls are like to be on, that John's been on most of them, but I've been on some as well. They're painful. They're very painful because PG&E's, at their words, not our words, they're overwhelmed. They didn't plan, they hadn't contemplated a shutdown of over half the state, half the counties in the state. They're getting an immense amount of pushback from the counties that don't have resiliency centers. John and Melissa Eads in particular, last night on the call, advocated heavily for our area to get the center that we do have. I think without their voice on the call, we wouldn't have a resiliency center at all, sponsored by PG&E. So the ones that you saw up there, that John mentioned 6, there will be 5 that are county sponsored. John made arrangements to have John and team that he's worked with, and I don't mean to only say John, it's been IT, Patrick, pretty broad list of people that have been working on this, but they made arrangements to get generators that are being brought into those spaces. Those will be at the county expense. Our staffing is going to be at the county expense, and I made that decision on John and staff's recommendation because the board had been so clear that we needed services for our community members. So we will have a resiliency center in all of the districts with the exception of District 5, and that's primarily because that's where most of the power will be, and there will be services there. We don't know the hours yet of operation. What we've been working through, because we hadn't planned on the resiliency centers being our responsibility, now we're working on a staffing plan. Our intention, our best laid plans right now is that we will have 2 shifts staffing the resiliency center so that they're open for about 15 hours, and that we'll have a manager both on the AM shift and the PM shift that basically oversees our staff that will be there at the time. And then we will have 2 shifts of CAO staff, morning and afternoon, so that when the centers are closed and our employees walk away from those centers, we know that our employees are buttoned up, safe, and have left their work. The last thing I want to touch on that John introduced was, our last goal was the preparation of the county facilities and us being able to run as much of we can of the county services. We're still working through with our department heads to try and maintain service as much as we can. We're getting a list from department heads of what departments will be open to the public and what won't. Our intention is that by the end of the day, that, and one of our press release will push out to the community, our public, what services will be open and what won't. And quite frankly, if it's not a mandated service or a service that happens away from the government center, for the most part, they are closed, because we will be potentially pulling staff for the resiliency standards and making sure that we have services for our community members out beyond the government center. Let's see, a couple other points. I think John, other than that, covered the rest of them. One question I suspect might come up, and I'll beat Supervisor Callaway to the question. We do have a generator up at Animal Services. We are planning on having contingent workforce be available there as well. One of the resiliency centers will be the library as well, so there will be a resiliency center here on the government campus, for lack of a better term. And then the other locations, we'll broadcast those out as we're able to lock them in and the hours, and we'll push them out this afternoon. So with that, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions.
Supervisor Stopper?
Do we have the list of elderly and people that are on, let's say, machines at home circulated? Have we reached out to some of our other districts or nonprofits that are working with them, and are we coordinating with them?
So good question. I should have covered that. It was one of the notes I put down. PG&E has first responsibility. PG&E's been informing us on our calls that they have pushed out information to their, what they call their medical baseline. Their responsibility in advance of the PSPS is to make sure that they're notified. And their protocol is that they push out the information, and they have to get a response like we ask from in Calaveras Alert. If they don't get a response, and they're into the window where if they haven't gotten responses, they're putting their teams out and actually knocking on doors and trying to make contact. So that's the first point. The second point, I don't want to step on what Health and Human Services has going, but Kristen has been working on that plan, and our clients and those that we need the services like the PG&E medical baseline folks will have services through Kristen's shop.
Good afternoon, Kristen Stranger, Health and Human Services. So I'll read, the response that I'm providing right now is specific to an access and functional needs shelter that we are looking to open. That's going to serve individuals who are electricity dependent for their purposes of their durable medical equipment, correct? So I'm going to read you this specific information. Sorry, I'm out of breath, I don't know why. The Access and Functional Needs Shelter for Calaveras County will be located at Mountain Oaks High School at 150 Old Oak Road in San Andreas. The shelter will open at 1700 hours on Friday, the October 11th, which is in line with our COOP plan. The parameters of the AFN shelter are for those who have durable medical devices and are required to maintain electric connection to electricity for the purposes of connection for their devices. The shelter will be open for one patient and a single caregiver, and the maximum, it'll operate 24 hours a day. We will have medical nurses and our clinical nurses, public health nurses, and our health officer who will be helping to coordinate access to the medical needs. If an emergent need is identified, of course, connection to the local hospital will be happening. We will be offering basic first aid types of services, as well as staffing that particular AFN shelter. It'll be the only one in the county, and it will be staffed by Health and Human Services team members. I think the last component of that is so that's the AFN shelter. I could give you a couple of updates on what we've been doing since we became aware of the PSPS since yesterday too.
I do have one question
Yeah.
on that. What's the backup power, and how long will it last in the instance at Mountain Oaks? Because that's included in the power outage area. And, you know, that's just a concern of mine. Mm-hmm. And with the thought being behind this is, you know, I don't want to complicate this, but for next time, let's look at some place that isn't being shut down for possible that possible area. You know, we're limited on different areas that can supply that demand. But if there's a place in Valley Springs or down in that area that could facilitate these services during this, we wouldn't have to worry about keeping fuel going to Mountain Oaks as such. I think we have one designated shelter down there at the Veterans Hall that could be used for these type of services.
So the site itself does have a generator power. That's how we're able to get it. Understood on your comment. And I can tell you that we, starting yesterday, did make phone calls to all of our in-home supportive services clients as well as our child welfare clients, which is how we've defined the vulnerable population that Health and Human Services serves. And if those individuals have indicated, we communicated within the resiliency center, the resource centers that are going to be opened, and that keep an eye on that communication. And if anybody had shared information that they were in need of and could qualify for one of the AFN type of shelters, we are reaching back out to them to let them know about the location.
Thank you.
Supervisor Mills?
At some point, are we going to have to do a board declaration on this?
John mentioned it in his presentation. He's prepared it already. Not all counties have done that, but 2 reasons. We want to be able to access Red Cross, and John and company have made arrangements for that. More importantly, frankly, I think with 30 counties being affected and this being such a large event, we'll have a stronger lobby with the governor that there needs to be some backstop from the state on this. There hasn't been to date on any of the other PSPSs, but there's quite a few of us that are being affected not only this time, but through other small shutdowns. So we want to be able to access funding if it's made available. To a point that's been made on disaster budgets, we're considering this like any other disaster. Kathy Gomes has prepared us with a specific budget for this. We're already tracking time. Kristen's been tracking time in her department. We're already tracking time on the appropriate forms. So that if funds get made available, because we do have a disaster proclamation, we'll be able to access those funds. You'll actually see that come back. John can do it now, and once he's got it finalized, he'll sign off on it, but we have to bring it back to the board within 14 days for confirmation.
So we're going to be tracking lost staff time as well?
Staff time, fuel costs, any use of vehicles. We've disseminated the forms to the department heads. Staff in the CAO's office has been specifically assigned to work with both the shelter staff and check in and check out of staff so we can track all their time against this.
So my next question would be
I think you asked, so lost staff time though?
Yes, that would be where staff can't go to work.
We'll have to track we'll be able to track the off time. We've asked for volunteers that will access accrued time as a result of this, so we will be able to track that based on their vacation, sick time, et cetera, forms. So we'll make sure to track that.
Okay. John, could you explain how National Weather Service defines their zones?
No. So there are numerous zones. Some of them consider the weather zones or fire zones is the NOAA term, and they reference specific zones. Obviously, we also have a grid or a zone system that we use for our evacuation mapping system, which is slightly different. Well, not slightly, it is different. And then as well as ours more mirrors CAL FIRE and their grid zone. CAL FIRE was a cooperating partner with us in developing our evacuation zone. So those are the primary differences between them.
So we're more overlaying the CAL FIRE model than we are the NWS model.
Yeah, we've made our own model.
Okay,
So, and it's 2 by 2 mile squares.
thank you. North Fork project is independent on its own grid, basically, through to Escalon Belota. Have we heard at all from them as to how they're going to be dealing with this?
I have not.
Because that's like the city of Roseville, there's a lot of independent cities on that. Fire districts, I've been working with them in my area for quite some time on this. They've been desperately looking for identifying low mobility, oxygen dependent, insulin dependent within their area, and some of them are starting to put additional oxygen bottles on their first response units as backup, et cetera, beyond what PG&E is doing. Have they reached back to you, or are you working with them to be sure that we can clearly identify those people in need?
We're doing that through a couple of different ways, through the PG&E baseline information that we have access to. And again, PG&E is the primary notification arm, and to touch a little bit deeper on that, what they've done is they use a system similar to ours where they begin trying to contact people They get down to the point where they're calling at once an hour to reach these people. And now that they've made the decision to de-energize, they are sending the teams out physically to knock on the door. If they do not get a response at the door, they are leaving hangars in addition to continuing those outreach attempts. And then, of course, on the hopefully off chance that they arrive at a location and find something that needs local responder attention, they're going to be reaching out to the local law enforcement agency, the appropriate agency, and requesting assistance. The fire departments, I anticipate that we will have representatives in our emergency operations center that we're standing up later this afternoon.
And that they'll be bringing their reps into the center so that they can
Yes.
keep the communication going. Have you tentatively determined where the center would be in Copperopolis?
If the what?
Where the center would be in Copperopolis?
We have a site identified, and we're working to actually staff it and figure out the hours of it right now.
And Angels Camp is doing the same thing.
Yes.
Where? Yeah, that's another thing to consider is the firehouse that now has its own genset. So they're capable of standing up.
Yes, although I'm, in my thought process, trying to hold our first responders in reserve. I don't want to tie them up with
Dealing
those
with that.
responsibilities. As an example, very early this morning, there was a structure fire in Valley Springs. And so they're out doing their good firework.
The thing is,
you want to keep them dedicated to that.
If you plug a lot of people right into the middle of the activity center for a first response, that can have a definite detrimental effect. Okay.
I'm a little reluctant to provide all the locations because they're still in flux and we don't know the hours yet. As I mentioned, our preference would have been to have PG&E take care of their commitments, but we've learned now we'll have to, when we get to go through this the next time, we'll make sure we have pre-planning for the resiliency centers. But right now, what we have tentatively planned, and we have to lock them in hours, it'd be Bret Hart High School, Copperopolis Elementary, Albert Mickelson Elementary, Jenny Lynn Memorial Hall, West Point Community Hall, Mountain Oak School, and San Andreas Central Library. And our hours with all of those centers are going to be dependent upon how many people we can get in there to staff them. If we might have to compromise some hours for the locations so that our community members have close access to something. The resiliency centers are an important concept. They're very much different than what Kristen has talked about for her populations. These resiliency centers really will be to come in and get a bottle of water from Red Cross, hopefully climate controlled. We're not anticipating it getting very hot this week, so we're lucky in that way, to charge their devices and after a few hours, hour or two or whatnot, move on. They're not designed to be shelters and have sleeping arrangements and things of that nature, food. They'll mostly be for power and information.
I remember years back, there was a series of rolling brownouts, if you remember those. And there was a governor at that time, Gray Davis, who was subsequently recalled. We're in the middle of a recall right now. Not to say that there aren't political consequences, but that definitely could have a bearing here. If we push back hard enough, that the governor will step up and realize that he has to protect the counties and the citizens of the state over and above what's being done with PG&E.
To give you an idea of the fluidity of the situation, we confirmed the PG&E Resiliency Center at 12:58 p.m. So things are extremely dynamic. I talked with PG&E as late as about 11:51 last night and was back in contact with them at 5:25 this morning. And at that point, we were still trying to identify a location that was suitable. So they have their own requirements. They're using a contractor that comes in and actually runs the entire center from stand-up to fold-up and staffing in the middle.
Who will be our single point of contact? You?
Yes.
Single point of contact. Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Christopher, you have something else?
You're talking about a second wave, and when is that anticipated possibly?
It's going to be basically, as far as we're concerned, a continuation of the weather event. Originally, on Sunday afternoon, they being PG&E and their weather folks, had split it into essentially two events, the first wave and the second wave. The first wave being about 0400 a.m. tomorrow morning, and the second event being later that day. And it just mashed itself into a single event. And then the third event is still very fluid and developing. The weather forecasts, unfortunately, are the farther away that you get, the more inherently unreliable they become. And so the closer we get to the event actually taking place, the more reliable the weather gets. And that's what kind of has shaped the fluidity of the event. So
Addressing the third event, potentially, when is it forecasted as of right now? Because that, I
believe
understand
it
it's
is
fluid.
I believe it is Thursday afternoon. That it appears from the conference calls that I've been a part of that it is to the south of us and maybe well to the south of us.
For all intents and purposes, PG&E's told us it's one deal, and for the county government operations, we're going to be off, I'm pretty certain, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We will make sure that the resiliency centers are open for the period of time that PG&E is shut off. So that means we may have staff out in those centers, and if it becomes extended because of the third event, I think we're overcomplicating it personally to look at it as three different events. PG&E's been real clear to say this is our window, and we're going to re-energize after that window. So I don't want our public to be concerned that now there's a second potential ESPS that's going to follow on it. They've been real clear for technical purposes, it's separate events, but for our public's purposes, it's all one big wind event, for lack of a better term.
Understood.
And where that stems from is from the last PSPS to the north that involved Butte and Yuba and Nevada County or Placer counties. They actually re-energized, and within 24 hours, actually it was about 18, I think, they de-energized again. And so I think they're going to be a little hesitant to break them up. And the first two actually collapsed into one fairly quickly by Monday morning. And then the third one actually cropped up this morning.
I want to thank you very much for this. If we learn one thing in the Butte disaster, you guys have a plan, you have to execute it, and you let the board know what you need. Well, you do what you do. We'll get out of your way.
That. We are doing our best to carry out your guys' vision of how this should be handled. Our team is working very hard for us right now, and we're tracking the things that we need to track ahead of time in the hopes that if we do have recovery, that we'll be able to recover that later. And if we don't, then we'll have some good information for us to use internally about cost and days of what that looks like per day, and we'll have some data that we can use to plan in the future.
Thank you. Well, you've informed us long in advance that this was likely to happen. Supervisor Callaway, and then Stan, did you want to add something? Or Supervisor Callaway, do you want to go first? Stan, come on up.
Hi, Stan Worth, MIT. I just want to take a moment to thank Al, the board, for the support that we've had in this. Work to prepare for this has been going on behind the scene for months under Al's leadership. And so between Al, OES, and a number of departments, facilities, IT, GIS, there's been a lot of work that has gone on throughout your county organization to prepare for us for this point. And so I just want to thank everybody for the work that has gone on and for the support. It's been a big team event. Thank you.
Well, it's looking forward to execution. Anything else, Al? You had Supervisor Callaway? You had a question?
Hey, Captain Ballard. How are you? Hunky-dory. Is there like a PG&E website or something that people could connect to that you could also give us? I mean, some people signed up for their emergency alerts, but as we know, many people haven't. But if we give it to them,
Yes, ma'am. I'll actually just refer to my handy-dandy notification that I received from PG&E. It is pge.com. And then there's actually the wildfire section and the community safety plan, or the community wildfire safety plan. Their telephone number is 1-800-743-5002. That's their landline.
they'll have one.
Didn't we push a reference out to, on Calaveras Alert that included that information too? So the
Yes, yes, we
We
pushed
pushed
that.
the contact info out to the public. as
I'm
well.
on Calaveras Alert and I haven't gotten anything.
I got 3 while we've been sitting here.
Is there something you want me to go to Meadowmont Shopping Center?
We will hand deliver yours to you.
Doug, would you like to add anything to your point you made this morning? Or Kathy? One of you? Looks like you're ready. Kathy? Ladies first.
Good morning, Chair and Board. Afternoon. Kathy Galino, working with John and all of our agencies. We do have our resiliency sites finalized. I just did that, so we're happy about that. I'm working on the different departments on having labor pool, so working to coordinate that. Our resiliency centers are at Bret Harte High School. The times are not confirmed. We're looking at some time between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m., but those hours may vary based on need. And as I said, this is a fluid situation. The second one is Copperopolis Elementary. There'll be a 100 kilowatt generator delivered there. There'll be a 100 kilowatt generator delivered to Bret Harte. We also have the elementary school in Murphy's, the Albert Mickelson Elementary. A 55 kilowatt generator will be delivered there. West Point Community Hall. Red Cross is actually going to be manning that facility and providing a generator there, but we will have support staff there. We have San Andreas Main Library. We have a 55 kilowatt generator that's going to be delivered there, and staff. And then Jenny Lind Memorial Veterans District, which will have power in Valley Springs, but we are going to have people manning that as well to help with any information. Any questions?
Supervisor Callaway?
Yeah. When you do Bret Harte or Michelson, could you put the location and maybe the others too? Like Bret Harte's a big campus.
Right. Yeah, so it's
Thank
the
you.
upper gym. At Copperopolis, it's the multipurpose room. At Mickelson, it's the multipurpose room. Michelson, pardon me, ma'am. West Point, it's the community hall. San Andreas Main Library, it's going to be the Chesborough room. And the Jenny Lind Memorial Hall, it's the main hall.
And they're all 6 a.m. to 9 p.m.?
Approximately. We will have staff there at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. We'll have to kind of see how the day goes and staff up accordingly. And thank you all department heads for sending me your list of employees.
Our intent with that is once we have those hours nailed down with our staffing plan, we'll be pushing that out not only through Calaveras Alert, but through social media. And just a quick shout out to Captain Ballard and his team. His patrol staff will be aware of each center and will be providing some close patrol when available to ensure that we have some presence there. And so that was one of the first things that we planned right off the bat, in addition to the captain assisting with standing up the EOC for us. So it's been a united front.
Thank you, Chair. Board members, Doug Oliver, Chief Building Official. In case the folks at home missed my previous safety announcement in the morning, I just wanted to do a brief recap. Essentially, once PG&E notified customers, there was a lot of social media chatter about how to plug a temporary generator into your service panel in order to provide temporary power in your home. That is incredibly dangerous for a handful of reasons. One is just the fact that if you do locate that temporary generator inside an enclosed building, there's a potential asphyxiation or carbon monoxide hazard. Also, just the location of the generator in proximity to combustibles, especially dry grasses, has a potential for a significant fire hazard, which is essentially what PG&E is doing in their shutdown, is trying to avoid that hazard. In addition, improper wiring method is a direct cause of fire in structures, electrocution hazard, shock hazard, and can injure not just the occupants of the building, but potentially fire safety, first responders, and line workers. As mentioned before, your pole-mounted transformer, if you're pushing power back into it, it works in reverse and steps up to very high voltage, which means it can be incredibly, incredibly dangerous. There are several ways to do it wrong, and some of them don't seem terribly bad when you look at it. There is a tendency for some people to take an extension cord and put a pigtail on each end so they can plug it into their generator and then plug it into the wall of their house. That's backfeeding power through the system directly to that transformer. Not turning off your main and doing something like this increases the hazard from you and your occupants to everyone who could come into contact. So there's like I said, there's a handful of really bad ways to do it. Some of them are what we'll call not code compliant, but not imminently dangerous. So our staff, while they're out finishing up inspections that have been requested, if they come across someone running a generator, they're not going to cite any violations. They're going to assist in identifying any significant hazards and informing the public on how to take it from imminent hazard to unsafe. Please don't do that, so that we don't perpetuate any significant issues in the county that's not directly related to the shutoff. So if there's any questions about this, you can contact me directly. I've also shared my contact information with the district fire chiefs in case their crews run across something that they really would like a second set of eyes on. Our staff stands ready. Any questions?
That does bring up two good points. There is generator safety tips on our PSPS website that comes from his shop. And the other warning that we need to be mindful of is just because PG&E is turning off the power does not eliminate the fire risk. A lot of fires in this area this season have been started by powered lawn equipment being used after 10 a.m. And I think last week or week before last, somebody was actually cited for, they were grinding at about 2:30 in the afternoon. So all of the things that apply to the red flag warnings are still very much in effect. Please, please, please don't use powered equipment after 10 a.m. if you have to use it at all. And that we need to be extra fire safe minded. No open flame outside. Again, discontinuing the use of those mowers after 10 a.m. is very, very important. Should we have an ignition, the conditions that are in front of us are ripe to have a fire.
Mr. Chair, just a couple of quick questions for John. John, on the prior power shutoffs that occurred, did PG&E give a time frame of when those power lines would be turned back on and power would be restored? And if they did, how close to those estimates did they come?
So my response will be largely anecdotal based on my personal experience. The very first PG&E de-energization in Yuba County, it took them about 4 hours to inspect and re-energize the lines. They threw a lot of resources into that inspection, as they are planning to do for this when this event ends. The issue that we're going to run across with this particular issue is just the sheer magnitude of inspecting all those lines. They have, in my opinion, they have been at or before those marks that they have set, provided that they don't run across any problems. In a wind event, on a normal day where the power is on, if something falls into the power lines, the system will actually sense that and give them a notification. Because we turned it off, we also turn off that notification. So what that means, they can inspect miles and miles and miles of line, and it only takes one branch across a line, and they're not going to be able to re-energize that area until the branch is removed, the issue with the rest of the tree is dealt with, and they repair the line. So there's a lot of moving parts in making that happen on time, and
So 5 days would be the best case scenario.
that would be towards I would say that that's accurate. It's just going to take them time, and it's just going to matter about what they run into when they're out inspecting these lines.
So you
I
may
w- I
wanna-
wish I had
you-
more.
You may want to plan on maybe a day or two longer than that if you're.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are an awful lot of moving parts, including Mother Nature, who, like I said, comes and goes as she pleases in these events.
We're going to open the EOC, and we're going to take the pattern that we've laid down for the first day to 1, 2, 3 days until the event's over. And if that affects us next week, then we'll go into Tuesday, and Monday's a holiday. So we'll go into Tuesday and we'll have the same pattern that we have internally. We have daily briefings in the mornings to let the department heads know what the status is, and then we have daily briefings in the afternoon to identify what our labor pool will be the next day, what resources we have running. Right now, in a 3-day shut-off, roads will still be, they have enough fuel to be able to do 3 days of work. Sheriff's office is fueled up. IWM, we think Rock Creek's going to be on anyways, but they're topped off. So our plan right now is 3 days will, for the most part, be business as usual on the fuel end. We've got priority services for our generators. If it goes into next week, then we'll start rethinking, maybe repurposing fuel from, say, roads and or IWM, certainly not from the sheriff's office, but from those other areas, and scaling back those resources so we can keep our generators going. But we do, and we have mentioned to both staff and the department heads that there is some potential come Tuesday that our power's not back on.
And that brings up a good point that people need to realize that if the power's turned off, it's going to be off for 5 days. Gas stations are not going to be open and available for you to use, so you really need to fuel up.
There will be one, Glory Hole Sports at Angels Camp will remain open.
Okay. Other areas are affected, though.
And it extends beyond that. If you're anything like me and you use that debit card, chances are that ATM is not going to have power to accept that debit card. It's going to be a flash from the past for a while.
Unless you're in Valley Springs.
Where everybody's going to go.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I already have plenty coming to my house, but I assume resources on turning inspection and turning on power is going to be mostly dedicated to higher population and denser areas first in priority, and then they'll work their way up. So technically,
You're last.
we're somewhere in the middle for our towns, and then somewhere towards last for the more rural areas of the county.
Yes, that's a very safe assumption to make. And remember that we're talking in scope of places much larger than even our largest cities that are going to be probably ahead of us.
But it's a whole lot easier to inspect an urban area than a rural area. So it's not that they're not going to put resources in the mountain counties. It's just that it's easier to drive.
So
Stockton.
it's easier to see lines in the urban area. The topography of the higher country presents an issue, but they are actually flying a lot of that with aircraft. So in a sense, the aircraft can cover more ground more quickly and access it sooner, but obviously that's more expensive and again be fewer between. I know that I don't have numbers, but I know that they are anticipating massive amounts of resources going back into inspecting lines.
So, just another quick question, sir. So when they're doing the inspections, are they entailing power from their line to a residence or a business, whether a tree has knocked that power line off also? Do you know?
I do not believe so. They are primarily concerned with their equipment. And once you leave the pole to your house, that's your equipment.
But if they energize and it's down, it could start a fire also.
Yes,
And
it
that
could.
way they say it's not their fault. It's your responsibility.
Well, and while I agree with that statement, so it would be incumbent upon homeowners to be aware of their equipment and make sure that if they have something impending a line, that they contact PG&E and notify them.
So if I decide to leave my home during this event, just so I go somewhere and have power, I would not know until I'm told the power has been restored to go back to my property. So I wouldn't have a chance to inspect anything until after that power's been restored.
Hopefully
So
when you left,
that's just something to be aware of, what I'm trying to say to homeowners
hopefully
or
when you
people.
leave, you turn your main breaker off.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Additional point,
Supervisor Mills.
please understand for all of those who have been calling on our cell phones, we are on cell phones as supervisors. The likelihood of you getting through, leave a message, we'll get back to you because it's probably going to be next week. But do realize that we will be somewhat restricted in our ability to talk directly on our county cell phones.
Move on to public comment. Anybody want to comment on this issue? Seeing Kathy, come on out. Tell us about our seniors.
I'll tell you about our seniors. I'll tell you more about our older adults, though, because, while I think it's great that our animals have a generator, I also think that we have, in Calaveras County, 75 clients on Meals on Wheels. That means 75 people that are not going to have power to keep their meals frozen. I need some help. I also have 3,500 meals in a freezer that I need a generator for to keep frozen so that they don't go to waste. We're looking into ready-made meals. However, we are a small nonprofit. We don't have cash for that. So we're kind of in a bind. Anything you can do. I don't know if PG&E would help us with a generator. I'd like just anything you have would be really helpful.
Thank you. Other public comment? Seeing none, I will close it. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Very well. Close this meeting, and we will go back to our regular meeting. John, thank you very much. We'll take a 5-minute break to let you break things down. Welcome back to Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting. In light of the presentation that we just had regarding the power safety shutoff program, we are going to cancel the meeting for for Tuesday, October 15th. It's just all kinds of stuff going on. We don't know when things are going to be able to publish. Our staff won't have access to their computer systems. So at the advice of staff and council, if you guys all concur, we will cancel that meeting for the 15th and return on the 22nd. It's going to make for a really, really long day on the 22nd. Okay.
In light of the situation,
We don't have much choice, so we're all informed. Let's start back up, Madam Clerk. We are, I think, on 15.
We are. We're on item 15 from Human Resources. To approve the resolution authorizing changes to the position control list by adding the position and job description of Housing and Community Program Manager, authorize a budget transfer from non-general fund contingencies 103-20010-5990 for $49,636 to 103-20010-5001. This item requires a 4/5 affirmative vote of the board.
Ms.
Good
Hawkins.
afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Judy Hawkins, Human Resources and Risk Director. And we are asking to approve or add the position to, excuse me, I had too long of a lunch today. So Human Resources worked with Health and Human Services Director and the Planning Department to add this new position of the Housing and Community Program Manager. This position is directly related to the homeless programs that were presented to you earlier today. And I think it would be most appropriate to let Ms. Stranger speak to this position and give you a little bit more background into the needs of the position.
Ms. Stranger? You're going to spend your whole day with us.
I know. Good afternoon, Kristen Stranger, Health and Human Services Agency. So the position before you has been discussed in concept over the past year and a half or so. And really the purpose is that we are at the point where we are looking to the board to approve a position. And when I say we, I'm speaking on behalf of our planning director, Peter Maurer, and myself, because we are in need of a resource to coordinate all of these efforts, to evaluate and present strategies. As you can see today, there's a tremendous amount of collaboration that goes into developing strategies to address homelessness, but that's just one part of it. There are elements of the housing element that need to be facilitated and proposed to the board for solutions, as well as general housing and homelessness related efforts. And so the purpose of this position is really to add a person who could coordinate all of those efforts. I think so you have the position description, you have the component that talks about what the purpose is. But I think a huge piece of this position that we're learning more and more is there's a tremendous need for ongoing community collaboration, ongoing community communication, board communication, and quite frankly, we're piecing together this with existing staff, and we've reached a level now where we feel pretty comfortable we feel very comfortable recommending this position because we've been mindful and paying attention over the past year and a half when it comes to the state resources, and we have an idea of what's coming down the pipeline. So that's the reason for the position being proposed at this time. Peter, do you have anything?
You okay?
I took my leg and just sort of stepped on it funny. It's like, okay, need to do that again. So I just want to support this position. It'd be funded 25% out of our department. There's a number of resources available to supplement that funding. I'm prepared to sort of adjust my internal budget to make it work. I've been talking to Kristen for about a year and a half, but I've been talking to her predecessors for about 5.5 years about needing this position. Every year when we do our housing element annual reporting to the state, that a person to be able to track these numbers is really critical. I've been through 2 housing element updates, and every year, every time we do that, we say, well, here's all these things we didn't get done. We'll just have to push it off to the next round. And so this is an opportunity for us to really attack some of these housing element issues that we had a lengthy discussion this morning on, and I feel very confident that this is an important position for the county to look at resources that are available. I've worked in other jurisdictions where we've had a housing program or a housing coordinator such as this, and that the knowledge, there are so many nuances with all of the state and federal requirements for housing programs that having someone that's really focused on those requirements is really beneficial to the county. So I really recommend that you approve this position. Do you have any questions?
Questions, Supervisor Miller?
Yes, how specialized is this position? In other words, the question is going to be how difficult is it going to be filled? Are you looking for another unicorn?
If there is someone with housing experience, that would be ideal, but someone with general knowledge of government functions can learn this. Obviously, we want to get the most qualified person we can, and Kristen and I will work with Judy to, we've established, you've seen in the packet the list of qualifying requirements as well as desirable attributes and the one that fits those best are who we're looking for. But if there's someone who just, has the knack for learning on the job, and, that's someone that can be trained to do that.
So you are asking for a half-year budget
Half of,
right now for 2019, 2020?
we're looking at a half-year budget, but yes.
And next year at 101, yeah.
Yeah.
The question would be, how long do you think it's going to take to fill? In other words, do you think you can get this position filled by January 2020?
We hope so.
Okay.
Other questions from the board? Supervisor Callaway?
I remember years ago a woman coming to board frequently named Holly Mines when we would discuss the housing element, and she was a big proponent, and the board, whoever was on, myself included, we just sort of kind of backpedaled this. I read the financing part of this, and I think it's appropriate, at least as I take my vote on this, that we understand that 25% is coming from the planning department, which would be, unless there's any kind of grant money, would be general fund dollars.
Yes, that's
And
correct.
I think we need to either be in or out on this. I know it says that Health and Human Services would pick it up if planning can't, but the planning department has a big part to play in the housing element, not Health and Human Services. So I think we need to commit to this come budget time when we're looking to shave dollars. So it's something that's been out there for many years, and I support this, and I support planning department funding their share, which happens to be 25%.
I see no other lights on from the board. Public comment on this item, item 15. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for a further discussion or a motion.
I move this item.
Moved by Supervisor Callaway. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Supervisor Toffenelli. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Kristen. Peter? Gina, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Outstanding.
Item 16 is from the Planning Department to adopt a resolution authorizing a notice of non-renewal for a 154-acre portion of agricultural preserve contract number 275 for Susan M. Little, and to establish California Land Conservation Contract Agricultural Preserve number 366 for that remainder portion totaling 239.94 acres for Dolores R. Buller on behalf of the Buller Family 2015 Trust, UTD 05-13-2005.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So as Diane just put it, we have before you another Ag Preserve contract for this year, number 366, totaling 239.94 acres of land for Dolores Buller. Property is located at 177 Railroad Flat Road, approximately 1/4 of a mile west of the intersection of Railroad Flat Road and Summit Level Road in Railroad Flat. In 2002, Ag Preserve Contract 275 was established, totaling 393.94 acres for Dale and Dolores Buller. In April of 2018, the Bullers sold 154 acres of that preserve to Susan Little. Not responding, or I should say not reporting any income from production, Ms. Little has no intention of maintaining the Ag Preserve contract for her 154-acre portion of that original contract. Because the ownership is now divided, we must now figure out what we're going to do, and separation seems to be the resolution. So she has agreed to a notice of non-renewal.
As a result, Ms. Dolores Buller wishes to reestablish her portion of the original contract in a new and separate contract. She currently has a lease agreement with Jim Martin, who's going to utilize the land for cattle grazing. The previous agriculture production on the property, as most of you probably know, was 60 head of bison. Their gross annual income far exceeded the minimum requirements of $2,000. Because this is a new agricultural operation, Tom Oneto, our county farm advisor, did a feasibility study which demonstrates the land's ability to produce a gross annual income of above $15,000. There's still adequate water supply on the property even after the division. As we all know, maintaining the land in agriculture will help reduce fire hazards. The entire thing, including the notice of non-renewal, went before your appointed Ag Advisory Committee, and they voted to recommend that you establish the contract and for Ms. Buller and accept the notice of non-renewal.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions from the board?
This can all be done as one act, one motion?
One motion.
Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for a motion or further discussion. My district, but I'm chair, so would somebody do it for me?
I'll move the set.
Supervisor Toffenelli.
Second?
I asked for public comment. Second.
Second.
Moved by Supervisor Toffenelli, second by Supervisor Mills. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Toffenelli.
Item 17 is from the Sheriff's Office to authorize a budget transfer from contingencies, increasing appropriations to capital assets for a combined total of $60,500 in the asset forfeiture budgets 5469000, 5469020, and 5469010 at $6,500, $30,000, and $24,000 respectively. Dispense with competitive bidding requirements pursuant to Chapter 3.28 of the county ordinance. Authorize the purchasing agent to piggyback on Sourcewell contract number 032119-CAT through its current expiration date of May 13, 2023, or any extended term for the purchase of a Caterpillar 249D compact track loader with a 68-foot 4N1 bucket tractor. Authorize the purchasing agent to issue a purchase order in the amount of $49,932.50 to Holt of California for the purchase of said tractor. Authorize the purchasing agent to issue a purchase order to the Trailer Specialist Incorporated in the amount of $10,297.42 for the purchase of a Big Tex 14XL-14 trailer, and direct the Auditor Controller's Office to post said budget transfer and authorize the purchasing agent to adjust the final budget fiscal year 2019-20 capital asset schedule accordingly. This item requires a 4/5 affirmative vote of the board.
Lieutenant, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Board, Mr. Chair. My name is Tim Sturm. I'm a lieutenant with the Sheriff's Office. I'm here in front of you today. Part of my responsibilities, or my primary responsibility, is Investigations Bureau Lieutenant. So I have management responsibilities, but I also have operational duties. So the agenda item before you is for the purchase of a skid steer type tractor. It's a tractor with tracks. And how we got here today, I want to kind of go over the history of what has brought us to this request and some of the processes that we use when a marijuana eradication occurs. There's a lot of weight that's associated with eradication of marijuana. Back to 2017, the recorded dump weights, this is what actually gets dumped at the landfill, was 161,960 pounds. 2018 was 115,000 pounds, and 2019 to date is 70,320. All that weight has to get into the trailer somehow, and so we've been using, to the best of our abilities, a mechanized process. Currently, the Sheriff's Office has a contract with a private contractor, and that company provides a similar piece of equipment. It's a tracked skid steer, and that machine with the operator can do heavy lifting, so to speak. Having the machine do a lot of the physical work reduces the overall effort that's required from the Sheriff's Office, but ultimately lessens the workman's comp potential for injuries, heat stroke, other injuries that are just potentially inherent to that type of operation. The contractor cost is not minimal. It is extensive. And using those same years, if we look back, the Sheriff's Office has spent in fiscal year 17-18, 84,000, 18-19, 136,000, and to date, 19-20, 71,000. It's a total of about $292,000 that we've spent on a contract. The average cost per eradication site is about $4,700, and that's the cost we pay to this external work. That's not including our internal costs. The contractor times, the amount of times that we have called him, 17, 18, 12, 18, 19, 17 times, and to date, 19, 20, 23 times. When we examined the amount of use that we were getting from this contractor, we came to the realization that this is work that is going to essentially cost less if we can do it ourselves. And it does require the initial purchase of the equipment, but the contractor costs are ongoing, and we have far exceeded the amount that it will cost to purchase the equipment by way of paying the contractor and essentially using him to rent the equipment. And renting brings us to an additional topic. We did explore the possibility of renting equipment. Locally, there's a source for that. It's about $5,000 a month. There's two major providers, and they have some pretty significant delivery and pickup fees, but it amounts to about $3,600 a month, but you have an additional $1,200 of pickup and delivery. And if we used that type of rental scenario, that only gets it to the Sheriff's Office. That doesn't get it to a work site. We'd still have need for a trailer to move this equipment in. Financing of this purchase, I'm going to let Mr. Flamenco address, but it is a non-general fund. The proposal is to obtain the funding from asset forfeiture, which is essentially money that's been seized from ill-gotten proceeds, and it's being converted into anti-drug use. The last thing I'd like to address is the Sheriff's Office has been in contact with Public Works, Road Department, and OSHA regarding the operation of the machine. There is not currently a OSHA standard, there's an OSHA standard, but there's not an OSHA licensing to operate this type of equipment. And the standard essentially says that you have to demonstrate proficiency and understand the environment that you're working in order to safely operate it. And that proficiency can be obtained through experience or education. We would follow suit with what the county is currently doing. I've spoken with their safety officer, and the provider, the vendor, is willing to provide a brief familiarization course with the machinery, and then from there it becomes essentially a hands-on training until proficiency is demonstrated by anybody who operates the machine. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Flamingo for a brief explanation of the financing, and I welcome your questions.
Hi. So what the agenda item is asking is to move from contingencies, funding from the asset forfeiture accounts, 5469000, as she read to you. So transfer money in those object codes and transfer it to 5701, which is the capital asset object code. So there's no general fund contribution to this request.
No, thank you.
Prior with the contractor doing it, that would be primary loading, and the sheriff's department was also helping with doing the work. So primarily, most of the handwork was done by the sheriff's department in the past, and then the subcontractor was doing the loading at that point for use. Is that what you're saying?
The subcontractor brings equipment, and he brings personnel to the best of his ability. There's not a hard number to the amount of workers that will arrive with him on any given day, because it's not consistent work for his employees. So to answer your question, the sheriff's office at every site is still performing manual labor as far as removing the plants and having to get them to a point where the equipment can pick them up.
Absolutely understood. And with the safety center, I have multiple safety center licenses for backhoes and operations as such. So that as long as you aren't operating on a highway, you're good with this type of vehicle, as long as you've been through the proper safety training and everything when it comes to the vehicle. You don't have to have a Class A license.
That's correct. That's our understanding, and that's been agreed upon by the county safety officer.
I'll come back to some more later.
Supervisor Mills?
What's your expected life cycle?
Comparative to the construction industry, the machine's going to have relatively low hours. We don't have a life cycle, but it is anticipated to last
20 years.
We would hope. We've examined the maintenance schedules, and it's essentially oil and hydraulic fluid. There is staff available at the county that has indicated they are able to work on this piece of machinery, and it does have a 2-year warranty. We've not found anything regarding shelf life or any end of life on that piece of equipment if it's properly maintained.
So my next question has to do with maintenance costs. Have you calculated the yearly maintenance costs into this budget year as part of what you're talking about here, or are we going to come back, are you going to absorb it into the budget or come back later?
We intend to absorb it in the budget because the anticipated cost is essentially a filter and 15 quarts of oil per year, and then the cost to replace hydraulic fluid that's lost during use. Absent any catastrophic failure, which wouldn't be covered under warranty, it's relatively minimal.
Okay. Just wanting to figure out how you're going to pay for that piece. Thank you.
Questions from the board?
Yes.
Supervisor Callaway?
Ms. Finkel, I have one on the budget aspect.
Okay.
So as I understand it, the sheriff's office is wanting to borrow money from contingencies and pay it back through asset forfeiture when the sheriff's office has those funds, correct?
No, the funds are currently in the asset forfeiture budget units, so there's no borrowing money from the general fund.
So it says we're authorizing a budget transfer from contingencies. Whose contingencies then?
It's the contingency object code within the budget units.
That's what I was going to get to.
Okay, so the asset forfeiture codes that you have, so that was not clear to me. So what you're saying is the money is coming out of asset forfeiture, you're not borrowing from the general fund?
Correct.
Contingency?
Correct.
Because I was going to ask you to pay it back with interest. Okay, all right. Now I'm back to Lieutenant Sturm. Okay. On the contract that we have with the vendor, is there any contractual commitment that we have to use them for X amount of time or X amount of dollar work, so that we're going to still be accountable to owing them even if we buy and operate this equipment ourselves?
There's no minimum usage identified in the contract.
Okay, so we just approved a contract with them this year. With Dirty Works.
That's correct.
So now we're saying we're not going to be using them, we're going to buy the equipment and utilize it, do it ourselves.
I believe the wisest option would be to maintain the availability of an outside contractor in the event that there is sites that we have seen in the past that are perhaps multiple days and require multiple resources. But as for any particular use, the primary use would change to the Sheriff's Department providing its own equipment.
So, my understanding in reading this, deputies are going to be doing this work? They're going to be the equipment operators?
That's correct. Assuming the deputy were able to demonstrate the proficiency, as I discussed earlier, they would be operators on the machine.
Isn't that kind of a waste of their skill set? We have people in the county already who have that skill set, or contract or hire others versus utilizing deputies, which we never seem to have enough of.
The sheriff, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Lieutenant. Sorry.
The sheriff has indicated that if the situation, or the sheriff's indicated he would be receptive to, if the road department would like to provide an operator, we could discuss chargebacks. The caveat to that would be that the operator would have to be available at a moment's notice, essentially, because this is an execution of a search warrant. And a lot of times we can't provide much notice on that. Additionally, we also recognize that they have their own duties and they're short-staffed. Incidentally, when the contractor brings laborers, the labor that's on site is actually more costly than a deputy sheriff on overtime.
I was waiting for that one. Okay. I guess I somewhat have a concern with utilizing deputies to do this. I'm not sure if maybe there's a way to fund another position in the road department that could be utilized, and it could be any one of a number of road department employees who are qualified as equipment operators. I kind of hate seeing deputies who we never seem to have enough of per the sheriff's office.
Sure. We view it a little differently because the deputy is already on site for the eradication purposes. They're already assigned to that detail for the day. So if we can get more out of them, have them serve a dual role, that's our intention.
And is there an opportunity to renegotiate with the vendor their cost or their obligation to come when called?
There's ongoing discussions, and it's to issue a new RFP or RFQ to perhaps attract some other vendors as well, to have them potentially available. In the past, the last time we issued the RFQ, we had two vendors. One was disqualified, and we have our current vendor who did receive the contract.
Okay, thank you, Lieutenant.
Yeah, Lieutenant, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you? I just want to strongly recommend that whatever deputies, whether it's 1, 2, 3, whatever, it goes through the training process through Holt when you buy this, that they should be issued a card to them, much like Ben pulled out. I have several of them too. And that shows they went through the proper training course. And when they're out on the site, they need to have that on them in their possession. Because if there's an accident, OSHA's going to come in and ask for that card to make sure they were properly trained.
Insurance purposes.
And insurance also. So it's very critical that they go through this process of training and they're issued that card. And then you need to check with the vendor, because some pieces of equipment, annually you need to, or every other year you need to go and get the card renewed. And any other training during the course that came up over the time that they last were issued that they've gone through that training. So you're current all the time. It's very critical. I go through it in my work all the time. So you need to make that a note of that and make sure it's done.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Typically, the ones I receive are from the Safety Center out of Sacramento, which is the OSHA-approved training center. And they go for 3 years. Okay. And that's your longest term. So, after your initial training through the vendor, I believe that your best, if you ask me later, I'll go ahead and give you this. If we do decide as a board to approve this, I'll give you the address to this place. And they do on multiple issues on safety training. So you can go through them also.
Yeah, there's a lot of different agencies that do it. And you can even get it done through a rental agency that rents the equipment out to you. And each piece of equipment, like Ben says, is different and the amount of training you need for it. And it has to do with what it's doing, whether it's a forklift, a reach forklift, the size of that, or whatever it is. So you need to make sure you go through the vendor, that you get the proper training and whatever certifications you need and how often you need it for that piece of equipment that you're using.
Okay.
Supervisor Tupper, did you have another question?
To address the contingencies thing, contingencies is like the general fund. It's unrestricted monies, though. Although you do have a specific fund that went into that, contingencies are considered an unrestricted fund.
The contingency line in non-general fund, special revenue funds, is treated as if it was a net asset, the concept of net asset. So when you have a surplus...
It could be used for anything.
As long as it meets the criteria of...
For asset forfeiture, it has to go back into anti-drug activities.
Okay, understood.
Supervisor Mills?
It is somewhat it is a restricted fund, but it comes from abscess forfeiture. You just plug it in as contingencies, so not to confuse it, that's what it is. Why it would be difficult for Public Works to be involved here is, additionally, you'd have to find somebody that was maintaining their blood panels or blood screening on a regular basis. So there'd be additional pieces that would have to fit in if we got additional people to help you. Your folks are already doing that, so it isn't like, it's something different. But for other departments, we'd have to confirm whether or not they are current on that blood screen.
Yes, sir.
No further.
I do.
Supervisor Callaway?
Okay. I'm interested in what the CAO feels about this. I mean, we issued a contract to do this work this year, and now we're buying equipment to do the same work with exposure.
So the longer analysis, just from a financial perspective, is that we'll save money on it with the equipment. Quite frankly, having the supplemental resource in the negotiations with Dirty Works, this might give us an opportunity to actually have some leverage in a contract negotiations we haven't had leverage in. We pretty much pay their rate. So frankly, from the negotiating perspective, I think it'll save us money on that end as well. So, if for some reason during the PSPS I was voted Master of the Universe, I would support this on their behalf. And Rick ran it by me ahead of time and ran the math by me, and I told him that I felt the math was right on it.
Thank you. Public comment on this item.
Jennifer Stewart, District 2. I'm really grateful for the sheriff to bring some information about what it really costs when we go out and eradicate something. So $3,400 for each particular site that they go and just pick up the pot plants. And the item in the 1795 that you guys said we were going to put a surety bond in there for $5,000, it's not nearly enough. So I just want to bring that up. And the other thing is, if the sheriff can give us this kind of information, why can't the board give us this kind of information of what it actually costs during the urgency ordinance for every single department that was involved in anything to do with marijuana? We ought to know what our costs are before we do it again.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Good afternoon. I think we need to make the distinction between how much money is spent on illegal activities and the program that's being established. That there is still a certain portion of the population that refuses to accept that there is different actors in what we have here in Calaveras. That was,
Hey, come on, no sniping.
I'm not trying to. Will there be PPE for all the sheriffs as well, going out on to these illegal farms to clean up? Is that part of, that's not part of what's on the agenda? I'm sorry. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Further public comment?
Bill McManus. An interesting point was brought up, and we've been looking for how much it cost for cost of different types of eradication and services for cleaning up marijuana for years, and we can't seem to get our hands around it. Now, as we get closer to this equipment being used and other things, or replacing contractors, this information is starting to trickle down a little bit. If we go back to after the Butte fire, the head of Public Works at the time, when they cleaned up all the sites where the homes burned, or trailers, or whatever, they had a burned site, and they had to scrape all the dirt out and test, scrape some more, take the dirt to a special place. Public Works said it cost $230,000 on average per home site to clean up. Now we're talking about some, just removing plants. What about the dirt that's left behind? You know, the house burned, the Butte fire. It was what was left behind that had to be cleaned up. That was the expensive part. So if we're spending $5,000 average, the whole plants to the landfill, what's it going to cost to clean up the dirt left behind? Oh, and by the way, how many have been cleaned up? None. How many have been inspected? None. How many of them been evaluated? None. How much training does code compliance have in the hazmat field? None. How much equipment do they have? They're going to have to come to you in order to do hazmat type work. How much? None. So does all this stuff just magically happen? Or do we have to do stuff like help the sheriff out to make a good deal to get him a tractor so he can save some money for us? You're not saving money for us. You're building this huge liability out there. Someday someone's going to have to pay for it. Someday you're going to have employees who may have health problems because they didn't get a baseline blood test. They don't have the correct equipment. I hope when they come to you, you'll look at this as an opportunity to serve the people of this county and save money in the long run. Spending a little money to do it right is okay. But we've got to start cleaning this stuff up because it's not going away on its own. Thank you.
Further public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for further discussion or a motion.
I'll move the item.
Moved by Supervisor Mills.
Second.
Second by Supervisor Stopper. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll return at 3:25.
See how easy it is?
Welcome back to the Board of Supervisors meeting. We are on number 18 of the agenda.
Number 18 is from the Public Works Department to adopt a resolution authorizing a loan not to exceed $3,176,252 from the Road Impact Mitigation Fee Special Revenue Fund to various disaster recovery funds for cash flow purposes pending reimbursement.
Thank you, Chair Garamendi, members of the board. I'm Joshua Pack. I'm your Director of Public Works and Transportation. I'm here today to ask you to approve a resolution authorizing that loan not to exceed approximately $3.2 million for disaster recovery funds for cash flow purposes. So as you're familiar with, Public Works is managing the lion's share of the disaster recovery projects stemming from 3 federally declared disasters, 2 with the winter storms in 2017, and an additional federally declared disaster in 2019. These projects, some are with, these are specifically resulting with FEMA. Most of these projects are eligible for reimbursement from both federal and state resources. And we must complete these repairs in order to return the locations to a reasonable condition. As you are very familiar, FEMA reimbursement can take quite some time, and so Public Works does not have the sufficient cash on hand or fund balance to float that time frame between when we complete the work and when we can get reimbursed from FEMA. So as you are familiar, in September, this was brought to the board as part of your adopted fiscal year 1920 budget. As part of that budget, we recommended a loan for a maximum not to exceed amount of about $3.2 million. That would come from the Road Impact Mitigation Fee Program, or RIM fee, and that's needed to provide sufficient cash flow until the reimbursements can occur. The government code does permit this. It allows the board to transfer money from one fund to another as public interest requires. However, this must be memorialized by resolution. So that's what we're here to do today. The board has already approved that budget. However, this resolution helps solidify that and allow that transaction to occur. Now, RIM does have a fund balance currently of slightly over $9 million as of July 1st, 2019. The county's Public Works CIP program does have a couple of projects utilizing RIM funds. However, those are in no danger of being affected by this cash flow, this temporary cash flow. If the board does not adopt this resolution, Public Works would have a difficult time delivering these projects without finding another funding source for those cash flow purposes. And so as a result, we are asking the board and making the recommendation to adopt the attached resolution. That ends my presentation, and I am here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Any questions from the board? Supervisor Callaway.
Mr. Pack, how the RIM will be paid back, but with interest? How is that interest? You can't do it from a FEMA or whatever,
Yeah.
or is it just like a?
So there is, there is, Supervisor Callaway, there is interest paid on that. It's at the pooled interest rate.
Right.
I think it's roughly 2% or so. So one of the things I want to be clear of is tomorrow we're not going to move $3.2 million into an account and sit there and accrue balance. As we do these projects and as these projects come off the books, we will borrow that money for cash flow. And as we get reimbursement, then that money will go back in. It's quite unlikely that we'll borrow the full 3.2. Some of our projects will be delivered, as you're familiar, pretty quickly. We have one project going this year, although that's a different funding source. We have a couple going in the spring and summer. The 2019 projects, the lion's shares of those, will likely go into the second half of 2020, and the big one will probably be 2021 or 2022. So likely the balance, we won't borrow all of that. However, that will be when we reconcile all of this. At this point, general fund does have a small contribution. At this point, it's determined that small little percentage, that interest rate, would be general fund, although the board can certainly take other action at a later date.
Just wondering where you were going to get the interest money.
Yeah.
Thank you.
To make a short story long.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes, it was actually listed as number 5 in your resolution, stating how that was going to be taken care of.
Gotcha.
Let's think worst case scenario, that we don't get the money back, or we never complete the projects, or one of the projects. How will we take care of it at that point? Has there been any thought about that?
Yeah, as of right now, we haven't seen any indications that we're not going to be reimbursed. We've worked with our partners at both Cal OES and FEMA. The projects were identified in particular with the last of the projects from 2017 and with the new projects with 2019. We're very confident that we're going to see a significant portion of the reimbursements, and we're doing everything we can. If we don't, there is that gap that we've talked about. That small gap right now, it's 6.25% that's currently general fund. If there are reimbursable expenses, at this time, we'll have to come back to the board for a solution for that. Right now, generally speaking, it's identified as general fund. However, the board can certainly take direction at a later date for an alternate source if that comes. My recommendation and my argument to that is these projects are needed. And one thing we're looking at as part of this in particular, 2017 has been pretty vetted, but with 2019 with a new eye, is to make sure, A, we're not doing these small one-off projects that we can do with our own local forces, which we've kind of whittled out. Number two is the projects we're working on are very clearly and intentionally identified to maximize reimbursement potential. So we're working very closely with FEMA, very closely with Cal OES. Of course, that risk always runs. I think that risk is extremely minimal, but if that does, then we'd have to come back to you for direction.
Okay.
Supervisor Toffenali?
Yeah, hey, Josh, your email of last Thursday, telling us about the projects in the county. First off, before I ask this question, what's the total amount that's in the RIM fees?
Total in RIM currently is about $9.1 million.
Okay. So is Highway 26 Olive Orchard Garner Place project, is that part of the RIM fee?
No, that's part of the Valley Springs Benefit Basin, so that's a separately funded source.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further questions from the board, is any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for further discussion or a motion.
I move this item.
Moved by Supervisor Callaway,
Second.
second by Supervisor Stopper. All in favor?
I have a question before we do that. Just one.
Sorry, Supervisor.
This requires 4/5 vote, correct? In order to transfer these funds?
No, it was already adopted in the budget. You already authorized this to happen.
Just
This is a
memorial.
follow-up meeting to adopt the follow-up item to adopt the resolution to assure the payback to RIMS funds. You've already authorized the borrowing from RIMS in the September budget meeting.
Okay, all right.
Very well. All in favor? Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you, Josh.
Item 19 is from the Office of Emergency Services to authorize the board chair to execute the Third Amendment to Professional Services Agreement between Calaveras County and TSS Renewables Incorporated for tree mortality project management services to increase the not-to-exceed amount by $401,300 for a total not-to-exceed amount of $1,950,000 with a term ending October 22nd, 2020.
Good afternoon, board members again. John Osborne, your OES Director. My recommendation is that you authorize the board chair to execute this amendment so that we may continue our tree mortality project. The basis for the increase is we are reaching the maximum amount of our contract with TSS, who is our project managers. We are in the process of receiving a grant for BLM in the amount of $88,000. That will allow us to carry on the TSS work and increase the amount of work that we can do, about $352,000. And so in order to carry out and continue the project with those grant funds between the BLM grant funds and the currently awarded CDAA funds, we need to increase the time frame of the contract as well as the amount. To date, the agenda submittal says that we have successfully mitigated just about 6,100 trees. That has increased to 6,876 trees, and we have identified approximately 11,000 trees that need to be mitigated. So that would help us reach this goal.
This was also approved in the final budget and authorized as well.
Questions on the board? Supervisor Mills.
I heard you right, 11,000 left to go?
No, 11,000 total, fortunately.
Total, okay.
Not left.
Okay. And
That grows by year.
Yes, it does. That number was based on an initial assessment in 2017, and now that we are moving through the first phase of the TSS, or of the tree mortality project, in that 2-year span, the beetles have attacked other trees, or trees that had been attacked but had successfully repelled the beetle, have lost that fight and are now dying. So this is just the next iteration in trying to mitigate this ongoing issue.
who in the county is painting the broad brush for what Foothill Fire Safe Council's doing, what the burner program's doing, what CAL FIRE's doing, feds, all of the fuel break projects, the fuel reduction projects? Is there anybody that's got the total picture? I was just at 2Care last week. They have a very good handle on where everything's at and who's involved with what. Is that something that your office is coordinating with, or?
Yes, sir. We are meeting with the CalAm team. We're meeting with the Fire Safe Councils. And we're managing this project. We're overseeing the projects 88 or 78, which is the fire tree removal, and trying to interface with CAL FIRE as well.
Thank you.
Supervisor Stopper?
We have you on salary, right?
Yes.
Good.
Very good. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for further discussion or a motion.
I'll move this item.
Moved by Supervisor Callaway. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Stopper. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good luck with all you got going on.
Item 20 is from the Clerk of the Board of Supervisors, the appointment of applicants to serve on various citizen advisory boards, committees, and commissions. What you have before you today are several appointments. The first is for the Area 12 Agency on Aging Advisory Committee. You have a vacancy for a term expiring 12/31/2023 and an application from Michael Hellwig. For the Assessment Appeals Board, you have one vacancy for a term expiring 9/1/2023, and you have an application from Carol Ann McDaniel, who is an incumbent. You have a vacancy on the West Point Cemetery District for a term expiring 12/31/2019, and you have an application from Brian Smith. And last, you have a vacancy on the Middle River Community Services District. You have two vacancies. One vacancy for a term expiring 12/31/2022, an application from Mackenzie Miller, and one vacancy for a term expiring 12/31/2020, and an application from Clay Westlake.
Any questions from the board? Seeing none, is there any public comment? Seeing none, we will take this as a whole. Is there a motion?
I'll move these as approved in their entirety.
Is there a second? Moved by Supervisor Stopper,
Second.
second by Supervisor Toffenelli. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you.
It's good to get those boards filled out.
That's right. Okay, so item 21 is from the Administrative Office to introduce and waive reading of an ordinance adding Chapter 9.22 entitled Cannabis Background Clearance Badge to the Calaveras County Code and authorize a summary publication of the ordinance, find ordinance exempt from CEQA, and direct staff concerning future fee implementation.
Thank you. We're going to take a 2-minute break while Mr. All gets set up, so nobody leave. Except for Megan, she can leave. Welcome back to the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors meeting. We are on item 21. Madam Clerk? There you go. Mr. All, you have the ball.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and members of the public. The item before us here today is to discuss the implementation of the proposed background ordinance 9.22. A little background on why we're here today to talk about this. If you recall, on August 20th, 2019, we had a presentation from the sheriff. It was a regular meeting to discuss this particular ordinance. At the time, there was discussion about how we would implement the background check for employees. I'll pause for a moment. You probably only have the 9.22 portion. This is the same presentation I handed out last week when we went over it. I took all the 17.95 out, and this is only the 9.22 portion of it. We're only reviewing 9.22.
I grabbed up the one from last week and hung on to it.
It's
That's what this
9.22 is in there as well. You just have to go. My apologies. I should have started with that explanation. We're trying to save copies. There's also copies of the 9.22 presentation. Although I handed it out last week when we reviewed it, there's copies of the portion that you have for the public as well out here under the podium. So going back to the history on this, on August 20th, 2019, we had discussion about the proposed ordinance. At the time, there was some consideration as to how we might include employees of the cannabis industry in the background ordinance. At the time, there was discussion that from the sheriff's office that we were concerned as to whether they should be included in the sheriff's office background. From that, a work group was formed. We had discussion on it, and the item was brought back on September 17th, 2019. At that time, there was direction ultimately from the board to consider the background ordinance living in the CAO's office and being potentially part of the regulatory ordinance. And so what's been included since that time in the presentation and ordinance is consideration for what work was done by the board in those sessions. Specifically, the board was unanimous that a CBCB or a background badge would be issued, and there was also 4-to-1 support of what I've termed here the clearance criteria that was reflected in 9.22 when we reviewed it, that was supported by both the sheriff's office and the district attorney's offices. And so since this has come back potentially to the CAO's office, I've been working very closely, obviously, with council. Thank you, Ethan, for all your hard work. He's amazing. And we don't say he's amazing enough, but he's amazing. And then certainly been working very closely with the sheriffs on this process as well. Really what I've been trying to do in this process since it has come potentially to the CAO's office is ensure that we can most closely mirror what the sheriff's office would be doing with the limitations that we would have from being a non-sworn office. And so specifically those limitations will be that we can't, as a non-sworn office, do the III background that's previously been authorized. We're going to speak into some detail on what we can do, though, but I want to talk about what my goal was as I was putting this process and considering what it would look like forward. And again, to reiterate is to ensure that we had a process that most closely mirrored what was brought forward by the sheriff's office, but for taking into account that there's certain parts of the background that we have to get to in a non-sworn capacity in a different way. And I'm going to discuss those alternatives as we go further. We wanted to emphasize, as the board has considered, and certainly the public would be interested in, that we ensure that the owners and the employees are thoroughly identified in the process, so we know the people we issue badges to, we can verify their identity. We work quite a lot on streamlining the process so that there wouldn't be a backlog that would exist, at least to the extent that we can, considering the very significant volume that we're going to experience for the CBCBs. And then we tried to, as best as possible, reduce the staff processing time, the interaction with staff between the owners and the employees, which ends up obviously saving time on the county side, but reducing the cost and time and effort. And then as we talk through this process, you'll understand a little bit better, but we have some mandates that'll be a little bit different than what the sheriff's office has in how we comply with the confidentiality rules. And we'll have to be more mirrored closely to some of the confidentiality rules that are required in California for backgrounding of employees, and I'll make special note of that. But we also need certain processes to be in place for the cannabis office, cannabis control officer, to have access to Department of Justice and FBI records. We can't share records across the Sheriff's Department to the Cannabis Control Office, nor can we share records from HR and background records that we have there. So we have to comply in this process with all mandates on confidentiality. So those are our goals as we move through the process. There's a couple things that are precursors for us to be able to even consider the implementation of 9.22 being in a non-sworn office. The first is that the CAO's office or the Division of Cannabis Control must apply for the process to get an originating agency identifier. And that's what we've been talking about in previous meetings as ORI. I can't tell you how from OAI they came up with ORI, but nonetheless, that's the specific number that the Sheriff's Department and or Human Resources needs, or our office would need to be able to get the fingerprint returns from the Department of Justice for California and FBI records. I'll dig a little bit deeper into what that means for us, but I'm specifically right now talking about what we need to be able to fulfill the process that you'll see later. The second thing that we will need is a third-party vendor, and there are many that do this kind of background check, but we need a third-party vendor to be selected for national database access and searches. The vendors that tend to do this, or the vendors that do this, they access thousands of public records databases nationally, and they can compile through public databases as close as possible for public data to mirror what can be obtained from the Sheriff's Office and the III. Now, please hear me. I'm not saying that it will be the III and it's not equivalent to or exactly the same as the ORI. In being a non-sworn office, we would use a third-party vendor to access thousands of public records and databases that the sheriff wouldn't in his process be accessing. So it's our way as a non-sworn office to be able to get national information separate and distinct from the way the sheriff's office would have to go about doing it. Of course, we would need staffing to complete the process, and we'll talk about what the time and effort looks like for issuing these badges. We need a machine to actually print the types of badges that we would propose, and then ultimately we need fiscal support, which is part of the fees that will be discussed later as well. So I want to talk through some key points that'll help illustrate how a non-sworn office would affect this ordinance as closely as possible to what the sheriff's office would do. This is a snapshot. I'm going to show you several snapshots from the Department of Justice webpage. I'm just trying to illustrate some of the information that's publicly available that describes what we have access to. A couple key points that you'll see the first, the highest blue arrow here on the slide. There are over 45,000 public agencies that are authorized to perform these background checks. They are not all law enforcement agencies. As an example, our Human Resources has an ORI number to be able to conduct these type of background checks. So we, in the county, have the ability to get multiple ORI numbers and be able to conduct the same background checks that the sheriff's office can do. This is where our process would be similar to theirs. I'll show you as we go through this that our returns for the Department of Justice and FBI returns are the same returns that they get when they submit fingerprints. It's important to note that from the DOJ, this is probably more than anything about what the process will look like in timeline. They're processing 2 million state level and 1.2 million federal background checks annually. So one of the things that the sheriff talked about in his process was we will be subject, whether it's through a law enforcement agency or through our own ORI, we will be subject to the amount of time it takes to return a fingerprint because of these, several million transactions that are already occurring at the Department of Justice. That part is a similarity we would share across our processes. So another important thing here that I want to touch on is if you see here, federal level background checks, and this is for any agency that's approved for an ORI number that requests both the DOJ and FBI returns, we get what's called a cumulative rap sheet, and that contains criminal history from any state or federal agency that report to the FBI. This is not unique to the Sheriff's Department. This is the same type of return that our Human Resources office gets in their ORI and any other public agency, with the exceptions of what you've heard both the sheriff and undersheriff talk about. If you're a youth soccer league or you have some other requirements for what your entity is, you have a much smaller access than what the Sheriff's Department can get access to in the records. But our application, if it was the board's prerogative to have us implement 9.22, would be for both the state and FBI returns as identified here. So our rap sheet that we get in our returns would be the same as what the Sheriff's Department has access to as well. So I want to talk about the process, what it would look like, and give an idea of what we were trying to accomplish here, and just walk you through what it would look like as an applicant. So if you're an applicant for a CBCB, our proposal to implement the background ordinance as it's been written would be for an applicant, whether it's an owner or an employee, to be able to go to the Cannabis Control website and download an application and fill that application out and email it electronically to the Cannabis Control office. Along with that, they would also download a live scan form, and this is something that's similar in both our background proposal and the sheriff's background proposal. We suggested to reduce the workload that both the sheriff's office and or the Cannabis Control office can provide that form. So an employee or owner could go anywhere that's a live scan approved vendor and get their fingerprints done. They can choose to go to a law enforcement agency, and they certainly can go to the sheriff's department and have them done there, but they can also go to any other qualified live scan vendor. And it's important to note that a live scan vendor just can't volunteer to do it. They have to go through a background check. They have to apply to be a vendor. They have to go through the background check, and they have to be certified by the DOJ to be a live scan vendor. And they have to have certified fingerprint rollers. So the live scan vendors have the same quality and certified fingerprint rollers as what we have in the sheriff's department. Of course, ours probably do it much better because we have great employees, but at the end of the day, they're certified in the same way. So it doesn't matter whether you're at a live scan vendor or you're at our law enforcement agency or any other city or county law enforcement agency. So in this process, the applicant would submit an application to us that has their individual identifiers, their social security number, driver's license, date of birth. That would be the first step in us identifying who the applicant is. Simultaneously, they download the live scan form that while they're going to a live scan vendor to get their fingerprints rolled, we would take the application and roll them with a third-party vendor. We can make the connect between the third-party vendor of who the applicant is that submitted to us, enroll them in the background check, and the vendor can push out to the person who's enrolled with us in an electronic application process. There's several that do this. So between filling out the background check and completing the live scan and filling out our application, we haven't even seen the applicant yet. Which, if I were in your shoes, would concern me, because how would we know the applicant that we're trying to background check is the person that we actually end up submitting a badge to? So there's a couple pieces of a control in this. The first is that, as you'll see here, the applicant provides an applicant transaction identifier. Every live scan vendor that rolls fingerprints provides this applicant transaction identifier. It's a unique number that's generated by the live scan machine that tracks back to the person who submitted their fingerprints. So we're able to verify that the person who submitted an application and that we gave the live scan form is the person that went and had their fingerprints rolled. A certified live scan vendor also has to check their identification when they do the process. Once the applicant completes the background through the third-party vendor and all of their information is in process, we're not handling them at all. We're waiting for their Department of Justice fingerprint returns, both from California and FBI, and then we're waiting for the background from a third-party vendor, and along with the applicant sending the applicant transaction identifier to the program office. Now we're in the waiting process for all of the returns to come back. That's no different, at least the waiting process isn't any different than what the sheriff's office would have, with the exception of us waiting for the return from a third-party vendor. The sheriff's office never contemplated that in their construct. So I want to evidence a couple key points here that I touched on already. This is from the Department of Justice's website. This is publicly available data, so you can verify it. I didn't add any of the emphasis here. In California, fingerprinting must be performed by a certified fingerprint roller. That's the live scan vendor or law enforcement personnel. Directly from the DOJ's website, an applicant transaction identifier is assigned to each of those transactions so that we can track against the person who was there, rolled their fingerprints, and identified there. We can track that information against their returns that come to us through DOJ and our ORI number. So while we're waiting for those returns in the Cannabis Control Office, and you'll see this in the staffing, here's what the process would look like on our end. We open a confidential file with the application. We enroll the applicant with the background vendor. Daily or multiple times a day, our staff would review the Department of Justice returns to verify not only the returns, but that the returns that we do get match both our application and the applicant transaction identifier. Once we receive the national background from the vendor, then the staff would notify the program manager. The program manager in this case, if you recall when we presented the notion of the cannabis office, this is a highly qualified person that has experience in being able to do the type of analysis that we need here in the background. It's not a law enforcement professional. However, this would be the type of person that could go through the rap sheets and the returns from the third-party vendor and be able to align the codes and potential convictions that we would see on a background or through a third-party vendor against 9.22 and the criteria that has been set by the ordinance before anybody is able to get a CBCB. If all of those things align, the identification of the individual with the applicant tracking number, with the DOJ returns and the third-party vendor, then we would notify the applicant. In this case, I'm going to assume that it's an approved background. I'll talk on later slides on what a denial looks like. If it's approved, we notify the applicant. They come down to the program office. We'll do another round of verification. That will include, again, the application, the DOJ returns, the receipt from the live scan vendor, the national background. All of that data we'll verify with the identification of the applicant when they come in. And if all of that aligns, they get issued a photo identification card. We've called in the 9.22 a CBCB. If there's a denial once we go through this process, there's a couple places that it's important to know what the due process would look like if there's a denial. In our process, we can make an additional conditional denial where the sheriff's office contemplated a tier 2 investigation. We would contemplate in this office, not that we would do an investigation through the office, but we put the onus on an applicant to do that background. If there's missing documentation, or there wasn't dispositions on their criminal record, or there's question about the returns on their national background check, then we'd put the onus on the applicant to produce those documents with a conditional denial. If they don't produce those documents, if they don't clear up the questions about their background, they don't get a CBCB. So in this particular case, what we did is we're asking the applicant to do the work that would have otherwise been encompassed in Tier 2, primarily because this office will be non-sworn individuals, and we didn't want to build in some sort of investigation to that level that the sheriff's office had in Tier 2. So we moved the responsibility onto the applicant to do that. It's important to note that while we have contemplated in the process the conditional denial, while they're going through a background check with a third-party vendor, if there's potential adverse effects that the vendor identifies, because they're also compelled to California law on background for employees, the vendor has to notify the employee or the applicant directly that there's a potential of adverse effect. So an applicant has two ways, either through the background vendor or through the program office, to get a conditional denial and clear up any questions about their record. Again, if they don't clear those questions up, they don't get a CBCD. If they clear those records up and we're able to verify that they don't have a background that would exclude them under the ordinance, then we'd be able to move them through. If we clear the questions up and they have a conviction that would exclude them under the ordinance, as has already been reviewed in several meetings, then we would exclude them from a CBCB. Where I think this is important to know for a non-sworn office, we probably, frankly, would, in this construct, deny more applications than the sheriff's office would. Absent an investigation, absent having a sworn background, it's as simple as the policy saying there's convictions for particular codes, and if you have convictions for those particular codes, there's no further investigation. You get a denial from the program office, and if so, then you have the availability of an appeal through a hearing officer, which is already documented in the ordinance.
So that goes into the question I was going to ask is, so pretty much you answered already, but without the, if there's a determined factor where there's any question, you would immediately put forth a denial based on the fact that they need to present the evidence to absolve themselves of said crime.
Well, the initial would be an initial denial. They either clear it up or they don't. And if they provide the supplemental documentation and they've got convictions that match the ordinance, then they get a denial. They're quite frankly not having investigative backgrounds. We wouldn't ask a non-sworn office to do the level of investigation that was reflected in Tier 2. Frankly, we default back to a denial because there's the appeal and there's a due process. So it's a really, as you can tell from the way I've talked you through it, it's a really linear, streamlined process, right? No, it is not. This is what it looks like. But I wanted to display, and I'll say I wanted to display it, but as we were working through this, really Ethan has put a lot of, he did this and a lot of the other efforts to try and help clarify how we show what the ordinance would look like under a non-sworn office. So we already talked about if there's a cannabis control office or whatever we call it, they fill out the online application, they email it to Cannabis Control, we batch up those applications and we send them to the background review. Simultaneously, they go to get their live scan and they go through all the transactions. And I should have noted and highlighted earlier, our fees compared to the sheriff's office are much lower in the aggregate, but if you look when we talk about fees and time and effort, the initial like stage 1 piece is really about the same time and effort as what they had documented in their form. Really where the change in fees is and the process as I explained it is, we wouldn't be charged, we wouldn't take any money at all for live scan fees, that's paid to the vendor, or if you go to a law enforcement agency, it's paid through a different fee structure. In the way we would propose selecting a third-party vendor, it'd be required that they can communicate directly to the program applicant after we enroll the employer or the employee into the background process, and they pay their fees directly to the third-party vendor. In that way, it helps reduce the monetary transactions, the staff that we would need on the monetary end. It probably artificially not probably, it does make the fee look artificially low. So I tried to capture in all the documentation as best we can, clear identification that these two pieces an applicant would be paying on their own. So they're on top of the fee that we would propose to support the staffing to do this work. So as we move forward past live scan, we get the rap sheet. If there's an adverse action, the third-party vendor notifies the individual. Background report is complete. Those all go into the Cannabis Control Office for review. And that's back to us taking all of this data from national searches, Department of Justice, state criminal records, and FBI records that have been reported to the DOJ, and considering those in the background. If there's no conviction that matches the ordinance, the application is approved, and we bring them in to issue the CBCB. If there's a denial, they go through this path, and the only way they can end up having a CBCB if they're denied is to go through the appeal. Okay, so I don't necessarily want to go too deep into the fees, but I do want to at least discuss them to a certain extent before we get to questions. For the most part, the fees in Tier 1, we don't have, in this version, we don't have any reference to Tier 1. As I said, the notion of Tier 2, that the Sheriff's Office is essentially eliminated for a non-sworn office to do this work, or at least the way we propose the process. But in the Tier 1, the time that it would take for a program manager to evaluate the background is not dissimilar to what was recorded in the Sheriff's Office for their reviews, and neither is the staff time for compiling the confidential file and doing the notifications and things like that. So it pretty much mirrors theirs in terms of time and effort. It's just different titles, and in some cases, the weighted rate for different titles is a little bit different. If you can or at least consider what it would look like in your mind for a staff person to open up a confidential file, to enroll the person in a background check, communicate with a third-party vendor, check the returns daily, issue communications, and ultimately complete a badge, we estimate about 1.75 hours of administrative time, and then about an hour and a quarter per CBC. And what we tried to do for this fee study is break down from like the annual FTE and try and explain to the board what it would look like to do one CBCB, so you understand the time and effort that would go into it. So in this case, the program manager reviewing the background file, comparing the background file to 9.22, ensuring the background either aligns with the ordinance or does not, and then issue a determination. That would all be at the program manager level, and so that would be about 1.25 hours. So we estimate just in this example, and similar to the Sheriff's Office example, that would take about 3 hours per CBC to issue of staff time. And that's not just to make the cards, that's to create the whole robust file that we've described through this process. And why that's important is because in the background, in the fee process, we relied on data outside of our own experience to examine what it may take for a cultivation site of about an acre as contemplated in 17.95, and there's a potential of 15 per site. That's also mentioned in the CEQA documents. As far as employees, this should say owner to be consistent with our proposed ordinance. But at the end of the day, there's almost 3,000 CBCBs that would need to be issued. A regular work year for one employee is 2080 hours. All of our salary schedules are built on 2080 hours being a full work year. So 3 hours per CBCB times 3,000 permits is a pretty extensive workload. So what we've tried to do is eliminate all of the handling, as you can see in the process, to minimize the handling of the applications down to that which would be necessary to have an effective process and do an effective review. And so that ultimately worked out to staffing per permit of $151. The equipment, I won't go into detail right now. We can actually look at the background data if you'd like to look at it. But having a CBCB machine and office equipment, et cetera, we ended up with a fee per permit of $153 plus whatever an employee or owner would be required to pay to do their live scan and pay the third-party vendor. This is a slide that I had in the presentation already. I won't go into that. I'll pause for a moment and give the board opportunity to ask questions on the process before we look at the ordinance or any further in the fees. What I've tried to be illustrative of here is what we tried for a non-sworn office to evidence to the board and our public that we would have a robust CBCB process, and that employees would have a pretty hefty process to be able to get a badge. At the end of the day, of the, I think, 17 counties that currently have regulatory ordinances, I think 2 have similar type of employee badges. So our process as proposed here, while it may not be the sheriff's process, and I don't want anybody to walk away from here saying that I created a process that a non-sworn office can do that equates to the sheriff's office process, this is still a very robust process that people would go through to obtain a CBCB, particularly as it relates to the other counties that have regulatory ordinances.
Supervisor Mills, your light is on first.
Thank you. I recall even going back to the urgency ordinance, post-urgency ordinance, and everything in between since then, the sheriff has continually has been adamant that the III was a necessary component. What is it so different about a III that he feels, and I can't speak for him other than what he told us, that it was that important?
I can't speak for him. I don't want to speak for him, but I can tell you the distinctions between the III and the national public databases is that III includes Interpol and some other things that are outside of our country. And I can't verify this. I wasn't here during the UO, but there were apparently people that came from other countries to be involved in the industry.
So we won't be able to look at somebody who comes from Finland, Iceland, Bulgaria, or anywhere outside of the continental United States, even though we know they came here before.
If they don't have a record in DOJ or FBI or any public database, we won't be able to get access to it beyond national information. I see Ethan's leaning.
And that only applies to workers, because all owners are subject to the III background check by the CDFA.
Well, it was workers that we found, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
In some cases, yeah. But owners would be subject to Interpol background check review.
I want to make one more distinction so I don't leave you with the wrong impression. The III has also national information that can be more robust than all of the third-party vendors can get through public databases. There are some counties, there's about almost 3,200 counties in the country. Not 100% of those 3,200 counties report into public databases. In some cases, counties throughout the country may not have reported into public databases. So the data that we can get back on a public national database search will not be equivalent to the III. If I had to give you a guesstimate, it would be only that. It's 98%, 97%. I mean, it's pretty high accuracy level of what can be accessed through these public databases. And as an example, any one of us can go to the Superior Court of Calaveras and put any one of our names in that database and find out any court case that's been put into the public database. And so at the end of the day, it's public information that these vendors go and search for. And that's what they specialize in.
And I'd point out also that the third-party vendors that we've spoken to, also, they do a history report on the individual, find out where they lived, And if they've lived in jurisdictions that don't participate in the public database, they'll actually check three or more of those locations as part of a flat fee for the background review. So they'll actually get on the computer and go check the individual database that doesn't report out.
It's a rather bold statement to say that we're going to deny more than the sheriff. I guess that I have to wait and see that would
Well,
be true.
I guess what I meant to say is not that we will, that we don't have the investigative background to clear up some of the things that they may do in their Tier 2. If you remember in Tier 2, they were going to go investigate and try and identify if they could, for lack of a better word, clear up the cloudy waters in a background. We don't have the capacity to do that. We'll be, in my estimation, a lot more rote about you match the ordinance or you do not. And if you have a conviction that's in the ordinance, as the board has evidenced is important to them, then you won't pass the background and you'll have to go through the appeal process. I didn't mean to say that in a way as if we would be bragging that we would deny more, but that there's, I think, a higher risk for denial because they, with investigative backgrounds, can invest more time and subject matter expertise in going ahead and trying to give somebody the opportunity to be cleared. We would, I think, use the hearing and the due process as that opportunity where the sheriff's office just has more investigative knowledge and resources.
Thank you. In terms of the custodian of record, that's the only person that's really going to have access to that information and keep that information. How are they going to be able to ensure that that information is kept secure? Let's say they get into an accident. They say they no longer work here. Are we going to then be at a dead stop until we can find somebody else that'll pass that necessary background check to become a custodian of records?
So the custodian of records doesn't have to be one person. We first submit the ORI. We get notification back from DOJ that they are going to issue us an ORI, and then we have to submit the custodian of records for background check as well. My understanding, and I'd have to check deeper, I don't mean to say I'm 100% certain, but that we can have more than one custodian of records. They just all have to go through the background check. They have to be approved by DOJ to be a custodian of records so that we can have a fail-safe on it. And then we have the same responsibilities as the sheriff's office does. We don't actually have these records. They're electronic, so you access them through a computer. So we need to ensure that we have security on the password protection, on the office that this resides in, et cetera, in the same way the sheriff's office does.
So I'll check that question off too. Thank you. Because the thing to look at is who's ultimately going to be the gatekeeper to monitor or oversee if you have multiple people that are doing this. Who's going to have the final determination as to whether or not the accuracy that they have and the decision they've made is truly following the policy that the board's created?
Well, I think that would exist whether it's the sheriff's office or the program office. The way I designed the process, the program manager would be the responsible person. I see the program manager, I don't mean they're equivalent in their responsibilities compared to a sworn officer, but we've got directors that are at high level, just like lieutenants and captains. And that's the level of person that we contemplated in the program office. So they are highly qualified, that they are able to do, the type of analysis that this would require. And at the end of the day, if we need an audit function, whether we would have that in the sheriff's office or in a program office, that question wasn't answered in the ordinance, nor in either their presentation or ours. And I mean nothing about that as it relates to the sheriff's office. We just hadn't contemplated what that audit would look like. I have spoken a lot about program metrics and how we should look at across the whole program, that we should have program metrics. What I would suggest in this is that we have an annual review of all of the ordinances and fees, but that it includes the number of permits issued, the number of denials, the time to issuance, the number of hearings, the number of denials at hearings, the number of hearings that are ultimately approve a CBCB, so that we can display to the board what the data looks like relative to this program, and Same for the regulatory ordinance as well.
Okay, I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Further questions from the board? Seeing none, I will move it. I'm sorry, Supervisor Callaway?
I didn't understand on the background process, that one right there, Mr. Earl, 608 owners? I was trying to figure out how you...
I'm sorry, the math is over here on the side.
Right.
In our other fee study, we had the assumption of 152. And since in the regulatory ordinance, we can have up to 9, quite frankly...
9 owners, 1 site?
Yeah. And so quite frankly, some of the data is the best estimate we can have under the circumstances. So 152 times 4, if I just took the midpoint of how many investors there could be in a site, that's where I came up with 608.
I don't know. Was that the county's experience during the urgency ordinance?
Well, an owner is anyone who has a 20% interest,
Right.
anyone who exercises management and control, anyone that's on a board of a corporation, anyone that's an officer of a corporation. So while there is going to be applicants who are sole proprietorships and there'll be one owner, there will be many that are more. In the urgency ordinance, there was numerous corporations that were involved, and sometimes you'd have 3 officers and 5 board members, and if they have investors with 20% interests, you could have more than 10 owners per site. And if they have a site manager, then you have 11. So you could have...
So is a site manager considered under that 608 or is an employee?
It depends on, owner is a squishy term, but a site manager is one of the listed types of individuals. The test is whether or not they exercise management and control over the business entity.
So it's just a guess on our part.
Right, we said,
Okay.
we're guessing that we're going to have an average of 4 owners per site, and it could be more, but hopefully not.
Got it, all right.
And so I want to hit on that before we leave that. My apologies for interrupting you. We have similar assumptions in the fee for 17.95, and I know that's not what we're here for, but in order to get to a place where we could figure out what the process looks like and what the fee would look like associated to the time and effort, we had to build certain assumptions in. In the fee study background document that's now publicly available, I've said it in my presentations, it's in writing, that this is one of the things that we need to come back to as we move through the process and look at some of these assumptions. If we built our assumptions on 608 and 2,200 employees, and at the end of the first year, our assumptions are wrong, then that ultimately impacts the fee and it needs to be reassessed. But to get us started, the place and time right now where we've not had a regulatory ordinance or a regulatory program, these are assumptions that we build our rationale off.
Okay, I have one more question. The live scan is completed at a vendor-certified DOJ. I understand that. But I thought I heard you say that we were going to approve the vendors or the vendor?
No, not the live scan vendors.
So it could be any live scan vendor who is certified by DOJ.
Right. If you're a live scan vendor, and you can only be a live scan vendor if you've been approved by DOJ.
Got it.
I would assume that the criteria DOJ puts on a live scan vendor is higher than I would put. So live scan vendors, we wouldn't approve. What I suggested in the presentation is we need a process to approve a third-party vendor for backgrounds. The background investigations.
On top of what the vendor certified by DOJ is doing.
So all the live scan vendor does is roll your fingerprints.
Right.
That's all they do. And then the Department of Justice returns, and any criminal records that have been reported to FBI comes into the program office. That's one piece. The second piece that we tried to mirror the III with is the third-party vendor that goes out and searches all the public databases and brings back provides us with a background check that's a national profile on an employee.
And at what point do they do that? Do they do that when you submit, when the live scan vendor submits it to DOJ and FBI, or after everything comes back, and
We-
then,
We would do it at the same time. The LiveScan vendor doesn't have anything to do with the third-party background. So the applicant, for lack of a better term, provides us an application, and it has unique identifiers for an individual on it. They download the LiveScan form, and they go get their fingerprints taken or done. And we enroll them with the background, third-party vendor for the national background search. Those two things happen virtually simultaneously. And then we wait for all of that data to come back in, ultimately into the Cannabis Control Office, so we can review it together. I don't mean together like individuals together, but we can review the fingerprint returns that are state records, FBI records, and then the national background from the public sources. We would review that together.
thank you.
So do you have more, is there more to your presentation?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to continue with your presentation, or is that complete?
Actually, other than that's the extent of the process piece of it. The only remaining piece is if you want to look at the detail of the fees supporting this and the FTE associated with that. And that's not the agenda item today. I just gave enough to be able to show what it would take to support the office.
Very well. If there's no further questions from the board, I will ask for public comment on this item, 9.22. Same rules. Everybody here has been here before, so let's do this with respect.
Well, it was quite a presentation. I really enjoyed it. Got a couple questions about it. First of all, you're missing one thing in this whole presentation. We got all the bunch of numbers and spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. The one thing you failed to do was establish how you're going to pay for this legally. The other day I had the opportunity to go through some government code on my computer. Found sections 29124, 29122, 29121. 121 talks about, or 124 talks about budget, how you get through that process. I know you can do it. Someone in this room knows how to do it because you did it twice today on items 15 and 17. You had to do something different with the budget, and it took a 4/5 vote. So the mystery solved. If you want to move forward with this, you're going to have to do the same thing. Now, the interesting part that I found in the government code was the definition of appropriations. That's where you take the money that you have and you appropriate it out to budget items, and you do these kinds of things, and it's all nice and legal, and it's open and transparent. Our CAO likes transparency to the public. We all get to see it, but you're not doing that either. Moving beyond that, a really interesting code I found was 29121, which I probably should read this one to you. Except as otherwise provided by law, obligations incurred or paid in excess of the amounts authorized in the budget unit appropriations are not a liability of the county or dependent special district, but a personal liability of the official authorizing the obligation. That means if you don't do it right, you're on the hook for the money. You're going to owe the citizens of this county the money back if you don't do it right. That includes the CAO, county council, probably the board of supervisors, certainly those who support doing this the wrong way. If you're trying to hide something, be careful, because if the money flows and it wasn't right, someone may step into your office one day, say, pull out your checkbook, we need this amount of money from you. That's because you have been stealing from the people in the county, the residents, the taxpayers. You have to do it right. And so far, you're not doing it right. You need to put together a budget authorization and get 4/5 vote, get this thing through, or wait until next year when the budget is open in mid-year, bring it up then, you get 3 votes, you can do it. You can't force it right now. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention these to you, and I thought they were kind of interesting. Thank you.
Ms. Weatherby?
Aurora Weatherby, District 5. Sitting here listening and having thought things out, what I've heard before. I can't support setting up a whole new department to control cannabis. I see too much fraud possibilities in this. I do not like the idea of non-sworn people making the decisions who's going to get these permits and who isn't. The sheriff's office has been doing background investigations for years, and in my opinion, they can do so and should do so. This is an issue of public safety. This does not need a layperson to follow a little code book that the sheriff's office already has. And they're going to make the determination who can get a permit based on their impression of a background study? Don't think so. As a taxpayer, I can't support this. I really can't. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Ms. Reinke?
Good afternoon, almost evening. Vicki Reinke. I just wanted to remind everybody where this ordinance came from. This was an ordinance brought forward by the Sheriff's Department and the DA's office. And I know from the history here, this was very important to the Sheriff's Office for public safety, that they would do background checks on everybody in a marijuana field or in that business. And somehow this ordinance got hijacked and has been given now to the CAO office. Are you kidding me? That is not what the people want. We want our law enforcement to be the ones enforcing this kind of a law. This is talking about background checks, about people who have been doing things in our communities all over the United States and outside our country, quite frankly. We've found here in Calaveras County growing marijuana. So you're not going to get support from the people on this one. Let me tell you, if it's not the Sheriff's Department putting this forward and doing this ordinance, it won't happen. And then my other question is, why is this ordinance separate from 1795? It says that it's part of the, I think Mr. Alt had mentioned that it's part of the regulation. So I don't understand, except for the part of the paragraph in one of the letters that was sent by our attorneys that says, although these are apparently being introduced as separate ordinance, they are clearly components of and a change to the county's overall cannabis program. CEQA defines a project as the whole of an action. And so this, in my mind, should be part of 1795. And, you know, I know for some reason we don't get answers anymore from the audience when we have an issue like this. I understand it with the original comments before the meeting, but we're asking questions as a public, and I would like someone to answer that. Why is this separate, and why is it not with law enforcement? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Corda?
I don't agree with the sheriff's hands being cut off. He should know what's going on in his jurisdiction. I don't agree with marijuana being grown all over the county illegally as it's being done and harvested as we speak. I don't agree with that either. And I put some of it at the sheriff's feet. But if you have a sheriff's department, he's supposed to know what the law is, and he's supposed to know what it takes to uphold it. And it's not happening. And now we have lay people that are going to take over upholding the law, keeping a secret about people's backgrounds when the sheriff should know about it. And that information should be available to the sheriff at all times. I don't agree with that. Absolutely not. This thing, last week, it was over $1 million. This week, it's just under $2 million.
I don't agree with that. It's not an even playing field for American citizens because you're not going to be able to do a background on someone who is is here from another country. You'll only know what he did here, but you won't know what he did anyplace else. That's not fair to our own citizens. And I don't agree with the citizens having to subsidize CCWD and for their pot growing, because pot growers are using CCWD water to grow pot. And I don't agree with this whole idea for a lot of the reasons that have already been mentioned, and I'm not going to elaborate on that, but this is just a fiasco. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Is there any further discussion, questions, or a motion? Supervisor Mills.
My only comment is that with how adamant the sheriff was in putting this together, and the DA, that for them to be out of it is almost a slap in the face of every law enforcement officer or deputy in this county that's elected to protect the people here. I absolutely disagree that I think it should be left in the sheriff's hands to decide. And I'm not going to support anything that takes his office out of the mix. The second thing is, I know that Ms. Rinke brought it up, and that is, I think that this is a substantial change to what the original EIR document said. It is a new project, and for that reason, I could not support a negative declaration. I think that this project has spiraled to something way, way beyond what was anticipated even under the urgency ordinance. So I won't be supporting.
Council, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Supervisor Mills. This ordinance was not included in the EIR as it related to the urgency ordinance and any regulatory ordinance. The staff report indicates that with this ordinance itself is not a project under CEQA, and so what is before the board today is a finding that this ordinance for background check is not a project under CEQA pursuant to Public Resources Code 21065, as the adoption of this ordinance will not cause either a direct or foreseeable indirect change to the physical environment. Even if it was a project, the ordinance is nonetheless exempt pursuant to Title 14, Chapter 3 of the California Code of Regulations, Section 15061B3, which applies where it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the activity in question, i.e. background checks, has a significant effect on the environment, as this ordinance does not authorize any changes to the physical environment. The ordinance simply sets forth a criminal history eligibility requirement for participation in commercial cannabis activities within the county, due process provisions for those who are deemed ineligible based on criminal history, and a means of identifying those individuals on commercial cannabis sites who have met this requirement. So I just wanted to clarify that the environmental review as it relates to the regulatory ordinances has nothing to do with the ordinance that's before the board today.
Council, I will respectfully disagree.
Supervisor Stopper, did you have some?
I'll move to introduce and waive the reading of the ordinance, adding Chapter 9.22 to the Calaveras County Code, authorize a summary of publication of the ordinance, find ordinance exempt from CEQA, direct staff concerning future fee implementation.
Motion by Supervisor Stopper. Supervisor Toffenot. You had something you wanted to say?
Yes, I have a couple of comments to make. And, I got to know a few of the growers over the course of the last couple of years here. And I'm sure a lot of them don't have problems going down this road with the background checks. But I can't speak for all of them. I do know that an email from Barbara Sullivan stated that there were 111 people that did not pay either the first installment or second installment of the Measure C taxes. Whether it's the 190 here or any of them, I don't have names, I don't know. But what I do know is that the sheriff and the DA's office craftfully put together an ordinance based on their experience of what they went through the urgency ordinance. They spent many hours putting that together, putting their experience together for that. And the majority of this board has cut them out of it. And I can't go along with that, with the fact that we're taking experience and telling you no thank you, and we're going down the road of somebody that's New Horizons that doesn't have it. And I can't see just cutting out law enforcement sides of it with what they've said when they came up here, and just putting it somewhere else. I think the expertise that they have and the ability to do background checks further than what's being told here, and this is a very well thought program. You did. I'm not saying anything bad about the program that you put together, but still, cutting out that part of it is something that I just can't get behind. I think we're not doing our constituents of this county justice in expelling the DA and the sheriff's office from this program. So I can't support it.
Thank you. Supervisor Callaway? We have a motion on the floor. So.
Yeah, I'll want to make some comments first.
Please.
Chair. We did incorporate the things that the DA and the sheriff wanted included in terms of the list of penal code violations. Those were all included. We agreed to that as a board. The CAO said today and that he has worked with the DA and he has worked with the sheriff. The sheriff said, if I don't do it, I want to be removed, you can do it. Doesn't mean he's going to walk away and turn his back, I'm sure. But the things they wanted are included in the background checks list of, I don't know the proper term, violations that someone could be denied for. So they weren't eliminated. They are just not going to actually do the work. It's going to be done in the cannabis unit, something which I said before probably should have been done years ago. So I don't see that as an issue. Also, the owners have to have a state background check. The state background check is not done by law enforcement in the state of California for all the cities and counties that allowed this to occur. So to get a state license permit or license, the state does the same background check that Calaveras County does. So, I mean, we're double dipping the same people. We either just need to move on this or just say we're not going to do it at all. And of course, people know my position on it. So I will second the motion by Supervisor Stopper.
Thank you.
And that's why.
A motion to approve by Supervisor Stopper and a second by Supervisor Stopper.
May I have one moment also? The sheriff had given up the employees. And as Supervisor Morita brought up, that we did instate all of the contingencies on there. In fact, after I had the meeting with the sheriff up there at the office that Mr. Mills was present at, we added another another to the 12 list and added another thing when it came to environmental crimes, and that would be number 13. So we actually added to that list that was originally put forth by them. And with that, the sheriff had given up the employees, but we decided to keep the employees on the list through the background checks as part of keeping the people safe in the community. My understanding from the sheriff is he's okay with this, with the fact that he can spend his time doing law enforcement while other people do the time on doing the paperwork for the background checks.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second.
May I make one? I apologize, but I just want to be clear before you vote that in working with this, I worked very closely with the sheriff to craft a process that mirrors theirs because he had put it forward. I didn't work with the DA. The sheriff and the DA's office work closely on the criteria and whatnot. I don't want to be unclear on the record and have left the impression that I've been working with both the sheriff and the DA on this. Almost daily conversations with the sheriff about the process as we were trying to build it out, but limited to the sheriff.
But the primary point is the triple I's are gone. That's the primary point.
Okay, I've got a motion, I've got a second. I'm going to do a roll call vote. Supervisor Toffenelli?
No.
Supervisor Stopper?
Aye.
Supervisor Mills?
No.
Supervisor Callaway?
Yes.
Supervisor Garamendi? Yes. Good, other Lieutenant Clerk? All right, passes 3-2. This will be heard again on the 22nd for the second reading, where it will be finalized. Move on to supervisor announcements.
In compliance with AB 1234, chaptered as Government Code Section 532.32.3d, board members shall provide brief reports on meetings they attended at the expense of the local agency at the next regular meeting of the legislative body. This report is required to include meetings attended for which there has been expense reimbursement, such as mileage, meals, lodging, etc., but may also, at the board member's discretion, include any other meeting attended by the supervisor on behalf of the county.
Who would like to begin? Supervisor Toffenelli.
Yes, scheduled for October 16th at the Jenny Lynn Veterans Memorial District Hall is Supervisor Stopper and myself have a town hall meeting set up for the Valley Springs plan, community plan. However, we need to stay tuned because, as was stated earlier today, we don't know about the PSPS and if that hall is going to be utilized one way or another. So at this point, I'm not canceling it, but you may see something, notice that we have to reschedule that if that hall is being utilized for a center. So that's all I have.
Supervisor Stopper?
And hopefully people can get the message if the power that's out. It's going to be a little hectic the next week, but nothing to report.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes, thank you. We had a very good turnout to the Angels Camp Business Association mixer at the Bank of Stockton last week. It's about 60-plus people there. I think it's going to lead some additional conversation and possibility of a new bank location for Copperopolis as a result. I'll be meeting with them later this week on it if power works. Attended the Foothill Fire Safe Council, a lot of good activity going on there, and certainly we should probably ask them to come forward and give us an update of the work that they're doing on behalf of private citizens in our county to reduce fuel loads. I attended the 2Care conference in Sonora last Thursday, met with Congressman McClintock and his staff, along with many other members of the Board of Supervisors over there. And also, I know you and I were at the East Bay Barbecue. There will be a 2Care tour coming up for Murphys and above in the mid part of November. I will keep you posted. I know that Ms. Callaway might want to be also involved in that tour to just kind of review the field break projects and the critical areas around communities of Forest Meadows, Avery, and Arnold. That's all I have.
Thank you. Supervisor Callaway?
Nothing that I've been reimbursed for.
Thank you. I have one item. I attended the RCRC conference up in Lake Tahoe, which was great. As we wrap up, I want to make a special thank you today to Mr. Patrick Martin, Kurt and Howard, and their whole team in And the facilities team, you guys did an excellent job up at the West Point Town Hall, which you opened. I want to thank you very much for making it happen too, Mr. Alt, and attending. I was incredibly proud of our county employees. People say county can't get things done. Well, I think we proved we can. So I want to thank you for that. Do you have anything to report, Mr. Alt, before we close up? Madam Council? Madam Clerk? Very well. We stand adjourned. See you on the 22nd.
Make sure it's adjourned, not postponed or something.
We're adjourned.